Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to What Do You Say, where we talk to remarkable individuals from all walks of life. I'm your co-host, Andrew Termody. If you like what my brother Frank and I are doing here, please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And remember to hit that notifications button so you can be notified every time we upload some new content. Our next guest hails from the small town of Carrollton, Missouri, where hard work and long hours on the family farm were the norm. Despite growing up Catholic and being a stellar 4.0 student, his seemingly model childhood took an unexpected turn at the age of 12 when he started grappling with alcohol addiction. Post-high school, his journey continued with success as he pursued an ag business management degree at the University of Missouri. In the midst of his growing addiction, in May of 2015, he heard the divine call to join the priesthood. While in seminary, he could no longer hide his addiction and was eventually asked to leave before finally getting sober on November 16, 2016. Once getting sober, he returned to seminary, and he's now the associate pastor at St. Teresa's North Parish in Parkville, Missouri, and the chaplain at St. Pius High School in Kansas City, Missouri. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Father Mark Famuliner to What Do You Say?
Welcome to What Do You Say, the podcast that peels back the layers of remarkable individuals to reveal their extraordinary sides and their incredible lives. I'm your host, Frank Termody, and I'm absolutely thrilled to embark on this journey with you. The podcast name's What Do You Say? But that's not how it's said.
How do you say it?
We say.
What do you say?
We say.
What do you say?
We say.
What do you say?
You got it. We say.
Hey.
Why do we play it first?
It's a cue to let us know that the episode starts, so when they go into editing, they can hear it. It's like the clap.
It's like the clap?
No, it's like
Oh, man.
not the clap in the sense that it's
like-
You like,
yeah, it's
ready,
like
set, like
yeah,
that.
it's like the
that clap.
the action clap,
Not the other
not the other clap. Right.
Yeah. What a takeoff right
What
there.
a tough choice of words.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Good thing Father's been around me for the last 6 months.
right. He understands.
Oh my gosh. Father, I was looking, how do you say your last name?
Famuliner.
Famuliner.
Yeah, you got it.
Famuliner.
Famuliner. It's
And that-
actually, when you look at it, you're like, I've never seen a name like that.
Ever.
So luckily with no kids, it'll die out. No. But no, Famuliner. So yeah.
And what kind of name is it?
So it's from like Germany. It's like German Alsace-Lorraine area where, they couldn't figure out what country they were. So they made that name up.
Well, there you go.
So yeah.
There you
it's a
go.
long
I
name.
was gonna guess Germany.
Well, I was going to say, so what I tell people at the parish is, can we just call you Father Mark? I was like, well, yeah. But then you have to give 10%. I was like, if you get Father Famuliner, it's only 5%.
Yeah, that's a discount.
Right, you get a discount. But no, with the high school and the grade school, I'm not going to make these little tykes.
They'll
say-
never figure it
No,
out.
a lot of them, no, they don't even know their own name, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just Father Mark, yeah.
Nice. Well,
Smelling your first, learning how to spell your name had to be a challenge.
Yeah, it took 3 years to pass first grade, right? Oh, man.
well, for those tuning in for more than one episode, I'm always going to have someone like you on this podcast because I'm always fascinated by someone who's kind of been drugged through the mud, whether it's drug yourself through the mud or life drug you through the mud, or it's a combination, and then Jesus gets injected into the situation,
Right.
and I'm just always fascinated by it. And for more, like, I think other people should hear it, but it's maybe even selfish for me, right? Because it always is a testament for me as well, for my own faith, and so thank you very much for being on here.
Oh, yeah.
Little background, Drew, I know you don't know, but so we always do, well, I shouldn't say always, this is our third year at Pius where we do a retreat. You actually spoke at one.
I did.
Yes, you did. Okay,
Yeah.
so you know about this.
I do know
All
about
right.
it.
So Father was the first speaker at this year's retreat, and he gave what I felt was an abbreviated version of his story because, would you have 20 minutes? Right?
Yeah, I think, they said, well, they wanted a retreat, and I was like 1 month into being the new chaplain at the school. And they said, actually, I think God had a hand on even that retreat because I'm new. And there's all these new coaches, new players that don't know me at all, right? And, I'm the new guy on the block. And so they wanted to put on this retreat where there's different witness talks, different testimonials. Guys go play sports for a while. And then we get together in fellowship, right? And originally on that retreat schedule, I was the very last one. There's like 4 or 5 talks. And I was originally scheduled to be at the end. Mm-hmm. And the head coach is like, hey, we want you to just give maybe a very brief version of like who you are, anything you want to share about yourself so that the guys get to know you. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you who I am, And so I thought, well, if I'm at the end, of course, guys are sleep deprived. It's overnight. It's the next morning because the last talk was supposed to be the next morning as overnight lock-in style retreat. In the back of my head, I thought, man, no one's going to be wanting to hear anything. They're going to be exhausted, And
I think I ended up being the last talk. Was there someone after me?
I think they ended up not having one the next morning. So you were the last one.
I think I might have been the last one.
And so a variety of schedule things changed where all of a sudden I got bumped up to the very beginning. And I always saw that as God's way of just saying, okay, this is like day one of being at a new school, new team, new coaches who don't know me at all. I just want them to know, here's who you got. And I just think, okay, and so actually I became the front talk, the very front person in this retreat. And so I just said, okay, here's who I am. And I gave a, 20, 25-minute version of my vocation story, as it's called, like what made you want to be a priest. So I gave a kind of 25-minute version of that. And for me, one of the biggest moments after that talk was I could tell, even as I was speaking in the gym, all the players, they were like, oh, wow, here's our new guy, right? And then even more importantly for me was like when the coaches were like, okay, yep, we can like listen to this guy, we can trust this guy, or this guy, even if he's new.
We can relate to him.
They're like, okay, here's a normal guy
that
happens to have one of these, right? And so that was just a powerful moment to start my time at the high school. Was just something like, okay, I found out like 2 weeks ahead of time I'm doing this retreat. I'm like, what's this retreat? And then I moved up to the front of the line. I'm like, okay, Lord, we're just going to open the mouth and let you speak. And there you go. So it was really good.
Having him, and even Father Reeb, I mean, some of my favorite moments is pregame, watching Father Reeb and even you just walk up and down the field with the rosary, and they're praying the rosary. And even like, I remember several times, we would be making halftime adjustments, the coaches, and you would be in there, and, listening, and, you could see a lot of times you weren't really paying attention to us. I think you more than anything, he was just sitting there praying over whatever it is we were doing, and it's just neat. It's neat to have that there.
And did I ever tell you what I do before the game with the refs?
No.
Oh, so I did this every game just because I just thought, why not? I always walk, I walk and, high five the players and walk around, say hi to the coaches. But then I always kind of make the laps and pray the rosary, right? But then I always go to the refs every game. I would go to the refs right before the game and say, hey, where were you on Sunday? I didn't see you in church, just to see how they react, just to think it can be awkward, right? And someone will be like, well, I had something going on. I'm like, oh, that's okay, that's all right, and someone's like, well, I'm Baptist. I'm like, Jesus still loves you, no big deal, or whatever, right? And there's a few times though where the refs would say, man, can you please pray for me? I'm like, yeah, because at the end of a game, I'm the only friend you got left, And so there was a few moments where I actually would like pray like over the refs and stuff because they just, they have a tough job. And,
Absolutely.
And no matter what decision they make, half the people in that stadium are upset.
Yeah.
And so I always enjoyed doing that before games. So it's just going up to the refs like, so Sunday, am I going to see you? So just making them awkward a little bit.
So you need to pray for the NFL refs after that last Chiefs game.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That would have been a great play. Kelsey throwing it back to Tony. I mean, that was just an awesome way to win that game. And so they just started calling that really. So they were talking about on ESPN how the last several years, they kind of just let that go. They didn't really call it. I think they called it once in 2022. They hadn't called it before then at all, and they've called it 11 times in 2023.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, so now they're enforcing the rule, and you're talking about a guy who's already got 5 to 7 yards from their defender what is one foot going to do, so I think you need to pray for those guys because Andy Reid is hot.
And he don't really, he does pretty good.
Yeah.
I've never seen him really like go nuts.
No, he said the NFL should be ashamed.
Oh yeah,
or embarrassed.
They were livid. They were.
It's like because that would have gone on. That's a highlight reel play, and it's just been erased from history. That's a great comeback play. I mean, the NFL at some level got to be like, oh my God, we wrote a great story here. Because at the end of the day, it's about dollars and cents for the NFL. I think I would imagine. Of course, it's about football, but it's a business, and that right there is not good for business. To have a call like that, it's like, come on.
Yeah. It's kind of like the traveling call in the NBA.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was a story on Michael Jordan, and the referee made the argument to the Bulls coach that they have to call these, and he's like, they don't want you to call it on him.
Yeah.
He's like, trust me, they don't want you to call it on Michael Jordan, the highlight guy.
Right.
So it's a similar situation. And I believe it was traveling. I believe it, because here, let's face it. How many times could they call traveling in an NBA game?
Oh my gosh. And sometimes it looks like they're traveling because they're 7 foot tall and they cover like half the court in 2 strides.
Right.
So that guy, there's no way he didn't travel there, Vern.
And then you look at it and you're like, maybe he didn't.
He's got a 7 foot stride. I feel like maybe that wasn't traveling.
Yeah. So let's start. Where are you originally from?
So I'm originally from a small town about 2 hours east of Kansas City called Carrollton, Missouri.
Oh, you were from Carrollton.
Yeah,
Okay.
Carrollton, Missouri. About 3,000 people. We come from a farm, about 10 miles out of town. So I'm from a farming.
And you were an athlete.
Yeah, well, I tried to be, aspiring athlete. Yeah, I played football, played basketball. They wanted me to wrestle. I was more built for wrestling, enjoyed wrestling, but I just didn't have that. I don't know. Just didn't have that. I enjoyed
a tough
basketball,
sport.
Right? And then I like to lift weights. Actually, of all the stuff I did with sports, it's the one thing I really do now as a priest, And but I liked lifting weights, like getting in the weight room. Loved football. Football was probably my favorite sport to play. But then I had a lot of injuries, shoulder injuries, ankle injuries, had some neck problems, back problems, to where I bet of 4 years in high school, almost 2 of them were just being sidelined. I just was always in for a few games, got hurt, had to come out, or had a surgery. And so my whole high school career, if you want to call it that, was always like injury plague / when I was out there, I enjoyed it. But when I wasn't on the court or I wasn't on the field, it was just like, all right, I'm just on the sideline.
So did you go to Carrollton High School?
Yeah, we just have one high school in Carrollton.
They're red, correct?
Yeah, red and white.
Yeah. It crushed my dreams my senior year.
Well, see, that's what's interesting. Like being with the Pius coaches, like y'all remembered Carrollton, like, oh, they were like, we played them and stuff. Whenever I was in high school, we made the playoffs every year. And one of the furthest we ever got was like quarterfinals in Maryville. And I remember we went up to Maryville a couple times. One of the years they were up there, and I'm like, oh yeah, the last time I was here was losing to Maryville in like 20 degrees, But it was kind of nice to go back to that, and that's why I've enjoyed being at the high school. Is it's kind of allowed me to re-enter into some of those moments.
But
right?
how old are you?
30.
Oh yeah, he's much younger than we are. Yeah.
I do have a highlight that I'm going to show him of me crushing that kid.
Yeah, you destroyed that kid.
Yeah, it was a Carrollton game. So
yeah, that was my senior year, though.
Yeah, it was your senior year. Yeah, but they got even because they took us out of the game to go to state the year after.
Sectional
game. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sectional game. So, so you're plagued by injuries.
Yeah.
And so how many surgeries have you had?
I had, a lot of it was stuff that they said we don't want to do a surgery for. We just want to let you just recover naturally. So I
Right.
had shoulder surgery on the right shoulder.
How miserable is shoulder surgery?
The labrum was gone.
Yeah. Did you have a total or did you total shoulder replacement?
Or no, not replacement. It was just
Total tear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tear.
Yeah.
And then this rotator cuff was having problems. They said, we really don't want to go back. We don't want to. I was overusing my left arm. It's my right shoulder that had the surgery. And it never really recovered.
And they're never the same.
To where even now, like I'm finally like rebuilding like my weightlifting strategy. And I'm finally able to kind of get back to certain lifts that I've never been able to do again, like incline.
Tough one.
Anything with incline I couldn't do. Over the head stuff if I have the right, form. But so I'm finally building that back a little bit. And then I remember one year I got back on the basketball court and you have 3 tendons in your ankle. And Within like 1 year, I tore all of them.
Had to have surgery on it.
They said, don't worry about it. They said, just have bad ankles the rest of your life, basically. I didn't have surgery, so it's just like, okay, just do a lot of physical therapy. And they never got any better.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just things like that where, and part of it I would say was injury prone, a really high pain tolerance to where I just kept playing through stuff when I shouldn't have.
Right.
And then also coming from a farm, we were working all the time. And so I was basically, I thought about this a while back, but from probably freshman year of high school until maybe a few years ago, I was never pain free. Whether it was back problems, my back started going out a lot.
What's worse than low back pain?
Nothing.
It's the most miserable.
Well, my back would go out like nothing, and I'd be like, moving sandbags or seed sacks, and back would go out. And
Here, mine, we were on vacation. This was last year. Well, it would have been 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And my back started aching. We were riding all these rides at Universal and walking. And I've had back surgery. And it was just driving me crazy. Well, I figured, when I got back in town, I could, exercise and work it out, whatever. So I go to practice that morning. Okay. And I just barely bend over to pick up a bag and I can't even move. I can't even breathe. Mm-hmm. It hurts so bad. I was embarrassed. The guys had to help me into the car and I immediately went to the Dr. Justice, to get a trigger point injection, and the trigger point injection didn't work. So now I know it's disc. It's not, muscle.
Yeah.
Because if it's muscle, that trigger point will knock it out. And the pressure, it literally just felt like a bomb was going to go off in my back. It was so painful. And the only thing you could do, you can't stand, you can't sit, you just got to lay there.
Right.
It's so strategic. I've had back surgery as well. It's so strategic to even get your socks on.
You can't.
It's
going to the bathroom.
It's
taking a shower. Michelle had to help me with everything. It's awful.
Rolling over in bed, things you take for granted. It's like you taught me how to roll over in bed after back surgery. Like you got to use your foot. You got to, I'm like, I got to have a form to roll over in bed.
Well, that's just like one time I was in college. I went to the University of Missouri, which we'll get into probably a little later. But remember one time I was just getting out of my truck and then my back went out and I couldn't even move my legs. So I crawled back in my truck and just used my arm to push the brake and the gas with my leg so I could get to the doctor.
It happened to me when my wife was out of town and she was out of town with Gianna for cheer. Mm-hmm. And I was home with the twins and we had to run back home. Somebody forgot something. We were on the way to a T-ball game. Mm-hmm. And I went to get out of the car and couldn't move. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And now I got the twins, they're babies. I can't move. So my mom had to come over and help me. I couldn't bring the kids to their game. It's just demoralizing.
Yeah.
It's so demoralizing.
And it's not even a thing so I was going to say, what can we say to our listeners? Hey, we're talking about back problem. What can we say? What advice can we give them, to not have back problems? But the only advice that I've ever got was, lift your legs, remove your back. Yes, that helps. But some people, I think, are just prone to it.
Hold on. I'm incredibly conscious. There's times where my back doesn't hurt at all and I'll bend over and people are like, is your back hurting? I'm like, no, not at all. But it's just because of the way I bend over and how conscious I am to not bend at my back and use my hips. And people are always like, something wrong with your back. And a lot of times it's not hurting at all. It's just preventative.
Right. And that's what I've been having to do a lot more now. It's even posture, or actually before bed, I will always start just laying on my back and I can always feel some tension even every day now. And I just kind of lay out, let it kind of relax. And then I can,
Yeah, because I'll lay on the floor for 15 or 20 minutes before sometimes I'll get a golf ball and put it right there. And I always have this spot on the left side, just drives me nuts. And, but yeah, I'm always super cautious. And despite that, it will sometimes, that disc acts up. And when it happens, the only thing that's going to help is I got to go get an epidural. That's the only thing. So I was down for 10 days. I went to church. It was Father's Day, and I'm like, man, I don't want to miss church. So I go to church, and once again, what's it all? Sit, stand.
Right.
Neither one of those things I can do, right? So in the middle of church, I'm sweating, and I told my wife, I said, you got to take me to the ER when we're done. And so she takes me to the ER on Father's Day, and luckily the pain management doc sees me in the ER and gets me in early. So this was on a Sunday. Tuesday, I had gotten an epidural, and then by Friday, I could move again.
Gotcha.
But it was just, when I had back surgery, had no low back pain, none. The only thing I had was I couldn't pick up my left foot. And I would be working out, and I would just, my foot would turn in, and I would fall. And I just had a little bit of like tenderness right here. And I just thought it was lateral compartment syndrome, which is basically kind of like the equivalent of carpal tunnel syndrome, but it's in the leg. So I thought that's what it was. Well, on a hunch, I went and got an MRI, and it was a disc. So they had to do surgery. And ever since I've had that surgery is when it happens to me. I never had back pain. And then I had to have that damn surgery.
Yeah.
But I mean, what are you going to do? Not be able to pick your foot up?
No, I was dragging my foot on the carpet. Could barely lift it up. I was tripping over carpet. And after I had the back surgery, thankfully, I have had no problems. And, knock on wood. There we go. Knock on wood that it stays good. But I'm thankful for the back surgery. Dr. Wright just did a heck of a good job.
Here, I really like, so here, my last episode was June of 22. So that's been, almost 18 months.
And we're not talking
ago.
podcast episode. We're talking.
Right. My last back episode
Right.
was June of 22. So we're over 18 months, or almost 18 months since I've had an episode. But God darn, it's miserable.
Well, what's for me, like having to like rebuild, like I said, I used to lift weights and do stuff like that. And there was different episodes where I thought, I guess I'm just not going to be that guy in the weight room anymore. Right. Because I was afraid to go in there because either my shoulders would act up, my neck would act up, my backs would act up, everything. And so for years I gave up on even physical fitness.
Right.
But then it was that opportunity where it's like, you know what? Maybe we can just start with those baby steps. Where I was that guy, like let's say 4 or 5 years ago, that went into this, at the seminary. We actually have a weight room in the seminary.
Well, you guys don't do yoga at the seminary?
No. Right. Someone's got jokes. And I remember sitting in the weight room and I'm like, I'll just start with the bar, and it was super humbling, but I'm like, I at least know I can handle the bar or like squat. I was afraid sometimes to squat and I'm like, okay, we're going to squat the bar. And so it was like, it's that humbling thing where you're in this weight room and all these guys are jacked. And I'm like, oh yeah, I used to be that guy, but now I'm the guy doing the bar. But slowly but surely, you work yourself back up to it to where it's like, you're never a finished product,
No,
where
it's always a work in progress.
Right.
Here, I've had 4 surgeries on this shoulder, and every single time that I went back to the gym, I had to start just trying to lift my arm, let alone the bar. I'm trying to just lift my arm.
Right.
And sweating while I'm doing it, So yes, it is very humbling. It's incredibly humbling. So Carrollton, Missouri.
Yeah.
And then you go to MU.
Yeah.
And what'd you major in at MU?
So I majored in ag business management and plant genetics. Now that sounds smart. What it amounts to is I was a businessman that wore cowboy boots. But no, to tie it in was like, so when I was in Carrollton High School. So I grew up on a big farm, family farm. Have an older brother who's taken over the farm.
What'd you guys farm?
We had like soybean, corn, wheat, and I always have 2 black Angus cows, so I could eat my own steak on Sunday.
Oh yeah,
Stuff like that.
there you go.
And I enjoyed farm life. Like I enjoyed working outside, but I didn't feel called to do it. And that bothered me because in that type of, rural America culture, it's kind of like a family business. You pass it down to the next generation. And my brother, if there was a way to he was like varsity level farm kid, right?
Right.
Loved it. Great. He came out of the womb with a John Deere hat. Right. And then I wasn't. I was like, well, I can do this, but I always felt like it wasn't what I was meant to do. And that bothered me a lot. And so I thought, okay, I had the plague, I think in high school of everything I did, I enjoyed. Why usually that's the time where you start to have your interests kind of focus on one way or the other. And you're like, okay, here's what I'm going to do with my life, right? Didn't have that. And so I wrote songs. I was in a gospel quartet. I like to sing. No guy in my area liked to sing, right? And then I like to lift weights. I like sports. I was good at school. I was a brainy kid, got good grades. And it was actually almost like a plague. Because then people say, they said, oh, I'm like, what am I supposed to do when I grow up? If I want to grow up, right? And they said, oh, whatever you do, you'll be good at. Well, that's not good for me because that means nothing. If you can be good at anything, that means you're not going to be like, what are you going to do?
They told me to get a warehouse job when I was in.
At least you had some direction.
That was my counselor. I was like, get a warehouse job. I'm like,
And so I went to Mizzou and thought, okay, if I go to a big state university, I'll throw myself at everything and eventually something will click. And so to wrap around to like the health stuff was that I started drinking at 12 years old. I might have shared this at the football retreat.
You did. So
Yeah.
so you started drinking.
Alcohol at 12. Mm-hmm.
What made you start doing that at 12?
So it was kind of, well, nothing really made me. I volunteered, you know. So what it was I remember I went down, it was like harvest time. And in harvest, like that's like the Super Bowl for farmers, right? Round the clock, it's when you make all your money, right? When you're harvesting your crops. And I remember, and only a recovering alcoholic would remember this, most people don't remember this, it was J&B blended Scotch whiskey neat in a little tumbler like that. Little 12-year-old Mark came down the stairs, and my family does not drink. Like, we had a liquor cabinet. It's on, like, the top shelf or something. But they just, a couple beers on a nice day. I've never seen my mom drink in her life. My dad might have, like, 10 drinks in a year, so not a drinking family. But I remember I went downstairs at 12, and my dad was happening to have a little bit of scotch, you know. And I was just curious, like, oh, can I have some of that? And he's like, probably looking at me thinking, 12-year-old, sure, have a sip. And he doesn't remember this at all. And I just downed it. Just curiosity. I'm just like, boop. And didn't cough, just thought it was amazing. And
You enjoyed the
I
taste of it.
enjoyed it. And I didn't realize even people like at 40 who don't like
yeah,
neat. You know? And my dad was like, oh, okay, well, Mark, you might need to go back to bed. I was like, okay. I mean, it was just truly like woke up, went downstairs, there's dad, had a drink, went back up to bed. But what that did for me was, as I mentioned, I felt a lot of shame, if you will, of not carrying on like what the family did early on. I always tell people there's like some core lies that creep in to the heart and soul of people who struggle with addiction. One is I'm unworthy of love. Note, these are lies. They're not true, but unworthy of love. The second one is if people really knew me, they would reject me. And those lies creep in. Sometimes it's a traumatic moment, and sometimes it's you don't know how they got there. When I was growing up, those got in, where I didn't feel like I really fit in. And then I feel like, well, if people really knew who I was, they'd reject me. So
the initial lie is what the issue, I should say,
Right.
that caused you to believe something was you didn't want what the family farm. You didn't
Right.
want to do that.
I didn't want to do that. And like all the other men in my family were like really good with their hands, mechanics, farmers, welders. And I was the guy trying to like go to the weight room or write songs or sing, right? Like I felt like I'm not a man. That was actually like the biggest lie was I'm not a man, because the men in my life, the ones I look up to, don't do what I do.
Right.
And so what was the one thing I thought, well, I can do? I can drink, because real men drink.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's a thought.
Right. And so actually early on, we go work on the farm, and I had different, relatives that we'd be working at the end of the day. Hey, you want a few Bud Lights? And I was like, sure. And I thought it was kind of cool, like little kid drinking with the big guys, but I just fell in love with it. Like I'm 14, 15 years old, just downing beers with a bunch of guys in their 40s.
And so the initial addiction
Right.
was alcohol.
Yes. Mhm.
Huh.
And it just took off. I mean, I didn't realize that at 14, you shouldn't be trying to like keep up with people in college, drinking, And so I started drinking, and like I said, I started sneaking drinks whenever parents were gone. I'd go climb up to the top of the liquor cabinet, or if I'd go to a friend's house overnight and they had a little liquor cabinet, I'd see what the levels were on all the bottles. I'm sure people know this. Like you say, okay, what are all the levels in the alcohol bottles? Let me steal enough that they all still look proportionate.
So you just drank whatever.
Yeah, it didn't matter. Didn't matter.
How old? So your first drink's at 12.
Yeah.
How old are you when you're finally? Well, here you probably didn't even realize it when you're an alcoholic. How old were you?
What I'm describing to you, I was doing by the time I was like a freshman easily.
Yes, because once you start sneaking, that's like
And once you're like consciously walking into people's houses and looking at the levels of the bottles, yeah. I mean, so
I'm doing that probably at 15, 16 years old.
Now, at this point, are you an alcoholic or are you just being an ornery kid?
Well, see, that's where I would say I was still in the ornery kid stage.
Okay.
Because again, most teenagers try to sneak stuff, right?
That's everybody. Yeah,
That's
everyone
everybody.
sneaks around and drinks or binge drinks or whatever.
So I would have never thought like, oh, I have a problem. I'm just finding this to be exciting.
Right.
Because I'm also the president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I'm the student body president. I'm the 4.0. I'm at Mass and I'm serving every weekend. Like, you see me, I'm that guy.
You're checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
You're Eddie Haskell.
Yeah. I'm doing great. And so then, but on the weekends, friends want to go have parties. And I'm like, whenever I would stay the night at a friend's house, it's because even at like 16, I knew I couldn't drive. Like what I did not realize was there's that moment when you drink where you know if you have one more, you're going to throw up.
Yeah.
Right? You know it. Like everything comes up to here. You start getting woozy. And you're like, if I have one more, I'm done. I didn't realize till looking back years later, I got to that point every single time.
You never just had a drink.
Never. I always drank till it was gone, till I fell asleep, or till I just couldn't remember.
Blackout.
Blackout. And the first time I ever had an instance with this, looking back, of course, I didn't know it was a blackout. That's why they're called blackout. But I remember I was at a friend's house, and this was all in high school. And we were drinking like something terrible. Like I was probably mixing Keystone Light with Bacardi Silver. It was bad.
Right.
But I'm in high school. And next thing you know, I'm driving my farm truck on the highway going home the next morning at like 9. So my brain went from thinking it's 10 p.m. on a Friday night and I'm having a beer to the next thing I know, I'm on the highway at 9:30 the next morning driving home. And I was scared. I'm like, this is weird. But I had no thought of like, this is what we call blackouts, right? And so what I'm getting at is that's my high school time where there's these little episodes, but I just thought, oh, I'm just good at this. I had friends that were a little bit older than me that went to college and they'd come home on break and I'd go over to their place and we'd drink and it was still very exciting. But what I realized, getting back to those lies, I'm unworthy of love. If people really knew me, they would reject me. The third lie is therefore I can't trust anybody, including God, to meet that need. And so we find something, be it alcohol, drugs, porn, gambling, whatever, food, to meet that need. Right?
Yeah, the shock to me was
Right.
is that as I get older, you listen to these different ministries. Porn is a big time addiction. I don't understand it. I don't wrap my head around it. I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of things that I've been dependent on, but I'm so shocked. Like I understand like women being addicted or being addicted to sex. I get that, right? But like pornography
Or men being addicted to sex.
anyway, right? Yeah,
Men or women.
doesn't matter. People,
Yeah.
people. But the addiction to porn, I mean, that's a real thing.
Oh yeah. And so like in high school, that's where it's like those, whenever I drank, those voices went away. The voice of, you're not a real man. The voice of, you have no clue what you're going to do with your life. All those voices stopped. I always call it the itty bitty shitty committee, right?
Right.
And I'm like, that committee, their meetings were adjourned when alcohol got in my system, right? And that was starting as a teenager. But I didn't know that back then. I just was doing the normal teenage stuff. And so fast forward to what you said, I go to Mizzou thinking, okay, I'll get that answer of what am I supposed to do when I grow up, when I go to college.
So the next lie is you'll get the answer and then the booze will stop.
Right. And so I go to Mizzou thinking that'll solve my problems. And again, I'm a pretty good kid, to be honest. Like I didn't join a frat because for some reason I had enough wherewithal to know if I go to a frat, I'm done. Not that I'm against fraternities. Some of them are great.
Wasn't
right?
for you.
But I just knew, I'm already too wired for some of this.
Yeah.
That if I was in a fraternity, it wouldn't work at all. And I was still like, had to be perfect. Still had to be 4.0. Still had to, show up to church on Sunday. Still had to put up that facade that I had everything in order.
I mean,
Yeah.
Did you apply that to your level of drinking too? So if I'm assuming that in a fraternity, if there was competitive drinking, which that exists, if you do everything at 4.0 and
Right.
you're probably going to take your drinking habit the same way.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was a challenge, right? Now, one thing I thought was hilarious in college was they had something called drinking games. I never understood that. Because what's the premise of a drinking game? It's to get as drunk as you can without thinking about it. I didn't want to distract myself. I just wanted it.
Right.
Like a game. Why do I need a game? Why do I have to flip a cup? Just give me the damn bottle. Like
Right.
I never understood it.
Right.
So I went to college, and I still I was in a country group. I was in a classic country band. Went to church. Was in a church choir. That's actually when I kind of reverted back to my Catholic faith. So we were cradle Catholic growing up. Served mass every Sunday. Did the whole thing with the confirmation, first communion, first reconciliation stuff. But it wasn't until I got to Mizzou that I realized I don't know what I believe, right? And then you go to a secular public university where faith is usually lost by the majority of this population, right? And I had no Catholic friends. I roomed with 3 militant atheists and a very militant, probably meant it in a good way, but just super, angry evangelical dude, right?
Well, people who are all word,
Right.
they're going to be angry.
Right.
You got to have some spirit in there,
Right.
too. Right.
And so I had all these people living with me, and they said, well, you're the Catholic. Why does the church say this?
It's always a debate with the atheist, dude,
Right.
And
I didn't know. And I thought, but again, being a perfectionist, 4.0 guy, just everything I had to do was 100%. I thought, well, then I got to be the smartest Catholic in the University of Missouri system. And so I did the ag business management, the plant science stuff, went to class, went to every class, did everything. But behind closed doors, I'm studying everything about the Catholic Church. Had nothing to do with getting a relationship with God.
No, you just wanted to be able to rebuke.
I had to win debates.
Yeah, you wanted to
I
be
had to win
rebuked.
arguments.
Right.
And I loved it because what God did, and this is where I would tell people, even if for you, your faith is just it's just our faith isn't a rule book. I think especially for Catholics, we struggle with this. I tell people, God's not inviting you to a to-do list. God's not inviting you to a rule book. He's inviting you to a relationship with himself.
And here, honestly,
Yeah.
that right there is the piece that I felt. I don't know if the Catholic Church missed it or if I wasn't postured to receive it. But I feel like as I've gotten older and I listen to more and more priests talk, it's you, it's Father Reeb, it's Father Rogers, I feel like the church has transitioned from ritual to relationship. And like I said, maybe I transitioned, right? Maybe it was me but I didn't. Yeah. I felt like either they missed it or I missed it growing up. Yeah. I don't know which one.
Here's what I'll say about it not being a rule book. So for somebody who wanted to do everything opposite of what the Bible was saying, it was kind of putting me in a cell. So it's these are rules. It's a rule book, because I was one of those kids who was oh, you tell me I can't do something.
Then you want to do it.
I don't want to do it.
Right.
Because I need to know why, why I can't do this.
Right.
Well, here, Al Pacino in The Devil's Advocate, have you ever watched it? Mm-mm. You should check it out. But he makes a very interesting comment where he says he gives you instinct, God gives you instinct, and then immediately sets the rules in opposition, right? And so that always made a lot of sense to me. It's why do they do that? Why do I have this instinct? Why does men have this drive to have sex? Right? But you can't do it until you get married. And you want to taste, but you want to eat, but you can't taste it. You want to taste it, but you can't touch it. Yeah. There's always this instinct, and then the rule is always against your natural instinct. And
really to see it as what I call, it's harnessing a war horse. The rules that we see of the church are the bridle and bits that this war horse that has all this strength and passion can harness that the best way, right? And so the best way to understand the rules of the church, and I shouldn't put it in air quotes because there are rules, right? What I'm saying is most people, even a lot of faithful Catholics in the pew, when they view it as a rule-based thing, they think, well, as long as I am well-behaved and well-dressed for an hour on Sunday, I'm a good person.
Right, and then they just go through this checklist.
Right. When you realize, no, the rules, it's like a playground with no fence. Studies were shown that if you show up with all these playgrounds and there's no fence around the playground, the kids won't use the full playground because they're afraid of what their ball falls in the street or they don't want to get too far off this playground. But then if you install a fence around the playground, they have the freedom within those parameters to just play with reckless abandon. That's the beauty of the Catholic Church is, we have a lot of parameters, but so that we can explore those parameters. And then you kind of know if you get a little too out of whack, I just hit that wall, and it's okay. It's actually so that within these layouts, you can be fully alive. And so, go ahead.
100%. And so I think the best analogy I ever had, and I didn't realize it when I was in my throes of addiction, but the Holy Spirit at all times had a very, very tight leash on me. Even in the thrones of alcohol, cocaine, ecstasy, whatever the drug of choice was at the time, I always self-loathed. Always. And I think it prevented me from getting too far where I couldn't get myself out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because the whole time I didn't realize there was this voice saying, this isn't you.
Yeah.
This is what you're doing. This is not you. And I would self-loathe to the point where it prevented me from, like, if I will use the word party as a verb right now, but if I partied one night, I couldn't do it back to back because I felt awful about myself.
Yeah.
And it would take me, a week, to get that out, and then, okay, I can do this again. So the period of time with which I indulged, it was longer than a lot of people. And a lot of my friends who really, really struggled, you being one of them, were able to be like, here, I can go back to back. Here, I don't even need to go to sleep. We could just keep going.
Right.
Never was I able to do that.
Right.
I always needed a good week to 10 days in between. So I don't even know if you would consider me, what I did was an addict more than it was just like binge use.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? Because when I had to quit, I just quit.
Yeah.
I didn't need to go to rehab. I don't remember having any withdrawals.
Yeah.
I don't remember having any of that. I just quit.
Right.
My wife gave me the ultimatum, and I was done.
Right.
That was it.
I mean, I think that's when you're trapped in that addiction, I think that's where you're most vulnerable. I think to hear what the devil's got for you, and shame, guilt, and regret seeps in, and especially when you're a person who's using something that is daily, it's like, well, shame, guilt, and regret kicked in pretty heavy after last night. So what's the best way to forget, just like you were saying, to forget, that you're not worthy of love, or that you're not a man, or, the easiest way to forget was just get loaded again.
Yeah, it's like that vicious cycle. I tell people, that your bottom, of course, that's an interior thing. Like hitting bottom isn't just you got a DUI, you wrecked your car. It's an interior reality, right? You got to choose it. Happiness is an inside job. Hitting bottom's an inside job, right? You might have a lot of external help, but it's an inside job. That could be coming when you hit that vicious cycle where let's say you use and abuse, like you go out, you wake up the next morning, you see the terror you struck on people or yourself or, your residents, like you see the mess. And then to numb the pain from using your drug of choice, you use your drug of choice.
Yeah. See,
that's when stuff's getting bad, which I'll get to in a minute with that. So I'm at Mizzou, and again, trying to just pursue the intellectual faith so I can win debates. And what was beautiful I always credit, there was one professor at Mizzou that I credit myself being a Catholic priest today, was for humanities. So I'm an ag student, I'm taking soil science and plant science and, farming stuff. But you had to have one humanities course. And I thought, what am I supposed to do for that? Well, because I was so fervent about winning debates in Christianity or faith, there was a course given by the religious studies department called The Reality of God. That was all it was. And the whole premise of the class was you sit with these other peers and you debate topics using God. Which I'm like, this is going to be an absolute mess. But it's exactly what I want. So I entered this class. I'm the only ag major. Everyone else majors in theology or majors in philosophy. And then I'm sitting there with Carhartts. And, I'm like, hi. But what was amazing was this gentleman, this professor, really for the first time told me, as I was debating these kids and we're having these conversations and writing papers, he actually looked at me. He wasn't a Catholic at all. He was actually like a Disciples of Christ minister or something. But in the course of that class, and I ended up actually working for him. I worked and repaired some of his property. He's like, oh, you got some practical skills. Do you want to work on my, like, he had like a dude farm, you know, where it's like in the city, but they try to do some stuff. And so I was like, on the weekends, I'd work for him. And so I really became friends with this guy. And he's like, hey, I know you're like an ag kid. Like you're from a farm, you work in, you know, agriculture. I think you might actually have something more than just like debates to win. I think this might be something more. And I was like, that scared me because I thought, okay, I love the Catholic Church intellectually. I thought, this is beautiful. I didn't know our church taught all this and they had a reason for it. And even if, as a college student, there were things the church taught that I didn't agree with or I didn't like or I didn't understand, I had to say at least they had an opinion or a thought on everything.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, like if you're going to go to church and get pissed off every time they say something you don't like,
Right.
you just may as well not go.
Right. We don't go to church so that we can just have our therapeutic God say, aren't you great? You go to church so that you can say, God, how can I become in your image?
Right.
Right. And so when this professor said, have you ever considered being a minister? I said, well, I'm Catholic, so no. And he said, what do you mean? I said, that means no sex.
Right.
You know, because like that was like I think a lot of people when they see Catholic priests, especially young ones, so many people come up to me and say like, oh, it's such a shame you became a priest because they won't let you get married. I'm like, you do realize like there is a supernatural call from God and Jesus was, you know, unmarried. And we're not going to get into all that. But I was just like, or I had someone like 2 weeks before I got ordained a priest, 2 weeks. Of course, you go to seminary for like 6 to 8 years. And you're well aware of the terms of the agreement. And 2 weeks before I got ordained, this woman said, you know, if you get ordained, you can't have sex. And in my mind, I'm like, I've heard this for years. But I said, really? Where was that? Was that in the fine print, you know? And anyway, but what I'm getting at was like, so that was still a big hiccup for me because I thought I want to be a father. I want to be a dad. I think I could be a good dad and have a wife and kids. But that was the first time someone said, have you ever considered being a priest? And I kind of said, oh, no. I made a joke of it, right? Like, oh, no, I don't want to. I want to be able to have sex. And so I ignored it. Well, then at the end of college, I was offered an internship with a grain company in Kansas City, Kansas, and worked the internship. And they called me, HR person called me up. This would have been 2014. And they said, hey, you had, of all the interns we had for this program, you had the best reviews. We're going to offer you a job and you can move to Wichita and work in this grain industry kind of like management position. And for my degree program, from my background, that was like a really good first job out of college. Like it was just kind of like you're in management, you're working in all this stuff. And I felt like my dog died. Something felt really off. And I thought, why? Like I just got the first call right out of graduating college to have a great job and I don't feel good. Like, it was almost like a physical thing. And I would say that was the first time I had an honest prayer, was I stopped everything. They said, you have 2 weeks to call us back. So I hung up, felt miserable, and I finally stopped.
Now, at this time, were you still drinking?
Oh, yes. We're still drinking this whole time.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
And I remember my first honest prayer was, God, what do you want me to do with my life? Because I never asked. I just did everything I wanted to do and had success at it, right? Whether it was academics, whether it was, you know, partying, whether it was grades, whether it was music, whether it was sports. I mean, it's like everything I wanted to do, I just did it without ever pausing, thinking that God had an opinion on it. And so for the first time ever, I was like, God, what do you want me to do? And it was kind of weird. It's hard. Like there was that still small voice that said, be my priest. Now, when I tell people about like the voice of God, I often want a cast of characters. Like devil sounds like Gollum, right, from the Lord of the Rings. God sounds like Morgan Freeman, and then there's Mark, right? That's not how it is. Most of them all sound like me. Right? And so
Well, it's hard to discern it
right,
sometimes.
so it's hard to discern at times. So I tell people, if you're trying to understand if it's the voice of God, you'll feel like peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, the fruits of the Holy Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And so when I heard that, be a priest, I was back to being that 12-year-old boy that said, what am I supposed to do when I grow up? That I'm not a real man. And I realized that's what it is. That I couldn't hear my calling in life at 12 because I wasn't spiritually fit to hear that everyone has a call in their life. You know, you have a dream for your life, an ambition for your life, but certain times we think, well, what is it? And sometimes you have to wait till a certain season in your life before you can really hear that.
Now let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So you say spiritually fit to hear your call, and it wasn't watered down from drinking. Is it? So that's
Right.
more of a question. So you heard the call,
Yeah.
even though you were it probably one of your, I wouldn't say lowest, but you were still drinking. So like you're further along in life. So I'm assuming the further along you get in your habit, at least as far as I was, the lower I got.
Right. So I would say this is what's amazing was felt a genuine call to be a priest, and I was working that job drinking around the clock.
Really?
Drinking at my job, I would spike my Gatorade and water jug. I had like a coffee thermos, and I would put Buffalo Trace bourbon in it. Like I was drinking around the clock at that time.
Wow.
Just like I was never that guy that was just like pounding stuff because
You were just drinking all the time.
bars were too expensive. I didn't want to party because I didn't like people. I was already at the point where I didn't want to drink with anybody. Where you start to get increasingly isolated. Like, no,
Right.
I just want to sit there and ironically, read the catechism of the Catholic Church and drink. Like,
You took your drinking seriously.
I just immediately wanted to, I just drank by myself and did the faith stuff, And so in the midst of that call, I was drinking. And so there was a moment looking like future. I'm like, man, like, I can't believe God called you in the midst of not being sober. Right. And so, because there's a whole nother episode we're going to get to in this, so I called HR back. This all happened within like 10 minutes after HR called the first time. And I thought, okay, this is from God. Like, there was just like, I'm not waiting 2 weeks because I'm impulsive, right? I'm just like, we're doing this. Okay. And I have no idea what that means. Like, I Googled like seminary. I didn't know what a bishop was really. I didn't know what a diocese was. I didn't know what a vocations office was. I just knew that I loved the Catholic faith, and God just told me to be a priest. Go ahead.
When does the pain pills come into the mix?
So the pain pills were actually like a little bit earlier. So I missed that part. I didn't mention that part.
So now you have two addictions. You're addicted to pain pills.
Yeah, usually hydrocodone and Oxycontin.
Yeah.
Hydrocodone,
Mm-hmm.
Oxycontin, and booze.
Yes.
Jesus.
Well, and
Those crept in the mix when I was having these injuries in high school, and I was prescribed these things, but I wouldn't take them.
You wouldn't take them.
I wouldn't take them because then if I waited to go to parties, I could get more.
Wait a second.
I would take some of them. I'd go to these parties and I say, hey, can I get some more money for them? It's like, oh, I got more. Do you want to? And I would end up just trading and getting more. I would multiply how much I had.
it was a currency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It became a currency.
I'm confused.
Go ahead.
You have to,
I missed
you
it.
would have the
I would
hydrocodone
have
and the
hydrocodone
oxys.
and the oxys. I wouldn't take them all.
You would go to parties.
And then I would say, hey, I got this. Does anyone got something they want to trade for it? And it'd be weed, or they say, oh no, like I can get you more of that, right? And I said, if you give me some of that, and I actually would end up beginning, we just start combining our supply, and so I still would take them, but it also became like if I don't take all of them, I can actually kind of maybe
Which being a person who, because I had pain pills were my addiction as well, and being a person to not take them all, especially when the withdrawal can kick in, is pretty disciplined just to be able to barter with them, because like I could never have enough.
right.
When I was in the
And that's where for me, I think alcohol was obviously my primary.
yeah.
It's like when I was, so like I said, I still had these things. And then that was more in high school. And then when I got to college, I kind of remembered that. And I'm like, man, like those always made me feel better. And so then I would actually just buy it. Guys would have, those pills from their own whatever backgrounds. And I say, hey, if I give you money, will you give me more of those? And so that was less constant. It was just kind of a pick me up or breakfast or something like that. Yeah. And so
So were you addicted to pain pills, or
I would never consider myself addicted to them. They were more just a little side piece.
Okay. All right. So the booze was your wife.
That was my wife.
And then the pain pills was your
girlfriend.
side deal.
Was
All
my
right.
side deal.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right.
those were going on, but those were more just kind of a little bit extra salt on your food.
Right.
And they obviously make you feel good enough to where you can, if you get hammered the night before, you could take a pain pill the next day and it's like, okay, I don't have to start off with a drink, but I will forget the shame, guilt, and regret
Right.
that clip.
And so that's why I usually, when I share my story, I always kind of like think, oh yeah, because they were just kind of like there, but I never thought I gotta have that.
Yeah.
Because I always had alcohol. Always.
So how old were you when you finally realized this alcohol is a problem and I need to have it?
I'm not there yet. Because I just thought this is what everyone did, right? I thought,
So you're in college and you don't know you're an alcoholic.
no.
Well, drinking is a norm. It's like,
Right, it's a beautiful place to hide from alcohol abuse because everyone's doing it. Now, one thing I did realize that one year in college for Lent, I had a college roommate for Lent, atheist. He's still an atheist to this day. Love him, though. Great guy. He was the first person to say you might have a problem. This was in college. For Lent one year, he knew I was one of those Catholics that did Lent. He said, hey, I got an idea for this Lent thing because don't y'all give up something? And I was like, well, yes, there was more to it than that. But I said, yeah. He's like, do you think you could give up alcohol? And I got really mad. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you do drink quite a bit. I was like, no, I don't. I only have 2. Everyone only has 2, right?
Yeah.
What it amounted to was I had a whiskey decanter right there. Nice, beautiful crystal whiskey decanter. I would have to fill it up every day, but it was beautiful. And I had 2 glasses, almost the size of this coffee mug. And I would always say I only have 2 because I would fill them both up. And those were my 2 drinks. But it kind of, you put the whole thing into 2 containers, now you have 2 drinks. So I would always only have 2 drinks a day. It was just the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I remember that Lent, I said, okay, just 'cause I was mad at this guy. I was like, fine, I'll do this for Lent. I'll give up alcohol for Lent, knowing that Sundays are cheat days, so I just got to go a week, right? And I made it to about Wednesday, and I had drank. I was like, well, it's just the one. I did just have one. And that's when I thought, no, okay, I'll just have one in the morning.
Your standard one.
My standard one, yeah.
You're not
right. I thought, I'll just, it's, doing good. And I never made it. And so that should have woke me up, right? Because this guy said, can you give it up for Lent? And I made it 3 days. And then just, he lives with me. So now I'm trying to make sure he doesn't realize
But you can't do it.
That I can't do it. So I'm filling up, I dump out apple juice containers and fill it up with bourbon because it looks almost the same from the outside, thinking that's going to, solve something, or I'm sneaking stuff with my roommate in my house. Any person that's listening that knows anything about alcoholism would know, yeah, that makes sense. I didn't know that was abnormal, right? And so that was a little brief moment in college where someone finally said, you might have a problem, right? And so then I call HR, tell them I can't take the job. I'm called by God to be a priest. They said, we've never had that happen before. What do we tell my boss? I said, just tell him that. I was like, okay, go to seminary. So I applied to this diocese, Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, St. Joe. And they sent me to a seminary. And seminary...
How old are you at this time?
22.
22.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm 22 years old, go to seminary, and...
Is that at Conception Abbey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I was only there about a year and a half. And...
How the hell did you drink? How did you...
Right.
How does that go?
Right.
How do you go a year and a half?
Right. It doesn't. That's why it took... So it was interesting where that year and a half is where my story really takes a turn. Because seminaries, by their very function, are environments that are meant to break down the old man so that the new man can come forward and serve God, right? The whole part of a seminary is to discern if you're called by God. Seminary isn't just
you're going to be a priest.
You're going to be a priest.
You're still trying to figure it out.
You're still trying to figure it out.
Okay.
What is the pass-fail rate in that? What's the washout?
So the attrition rate when I was there was probably 60%.
6%.
Don't make it through,
Sorry, guys. So the attrition rate, 60%.
I would say so. Yep.
Okay.
Most guys that enter seminary discern out, as it's called. And that's because, like we mentioned earlier, seminary isn't necessarily like I'm showing up to seminary and as soon as I darken the doors of the place, I know I'm going to be a priest. It's actually a place where you can kind of get away from the world, and there's a structure involved that's supposed to help you discern, help the man or the woman in like a convent, like a religious life setting, say, is this really what I'm meant to do? Well, so it's a very structured environment. And when I first entered Conception Abbey, there were two concepts that to my mind were completely foreign. The first was dry campus. They said this is or they might even said it was like a moist campus, and I didn't like that word moist. And I'm like, ugh. And I was just like, what is that? What do you mean? And there was this idea you can have alcohol in your rooms, and you can go out on the weekends, to go out to eat or something. Like they were just very, very proper, and I think they were just expecting most guys are probably fine with that. And the other thing they had was what they called off-campus weekends. And that was where, like, once a month, you could, like, spend from a Friday through a Sunday, go off campus. So now I'm thinking I can't have alcohol, and I can only really get off campus once a month. What is this, And, but while I was there, so to your all's point, I'm still drinking, but now I have to work really hard at it.
So how are you doing that? How are you sneaking it?
Right. Well, so I keep it in my truck. And so I usually would go out to my truck. Immediately what I learned was I started to have the moment where I realized I couldn't just like have it all day, right? Just because the structure, we'd start like at 5:30 in the morning, go till 9 o'clock at night. And I just didn't have the time. It's such a regimented environment. You couldn't really quote unquote sneak anything. And so I started getting increasingly, as we say, irritable, restless, and get discontent, right? Like I'm having a good time at the seminary, made some great friends at the seminary, but I'm getting increasingly like irritable, egotistical, grandiose. Like my social and relational capacities are really getting out of whack. And I'm realizing, looking back, it's because I wasn't really able to really keep my drinking the way I wanted it, right? And so on the weekends, I just binge. I really would. I mean, I would go to, whether it's in a restaurant setting or a bar setting, or just sneaking it in my vehicle. Like I try to keep it up, but
Did you make up for lost time?
Right, I had to do that.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't drink all week long?
I would try to sneak it in the evenings when I could, but it was really hard, right? So all of a sudden, my whole rhythm of life up until that point.
I'm curious how you don't actually like have physical withdrawals.
Right.
Now, and I'm also curious is how well you hit it, because if nobody's picking up on the cues and you're drinking,
They may not have known
must have
him.
been very isolated when you were drinking.
Well, there's only like 2 people who knew how much I did, but this is where it kind of falls apart. I thought I was way more sneaky than I was.
You always do, I think.
Right. Because there'd be events, like we'd have donor events or parents' weekend or, some of those bigger events where, the bottles of wine got brought out. Every time, there was a number of times where people had to like carry me up to my room.
Really?
And this would be a public setting, at a monastery. Or we used to have this where like I would volunteer to be the quote unquote bartender for all our guests. After a while, I wasn't allowed to do that because I was way too friendly of a bartender, or I was just, hey, I had access to it all. So there's just these little things where they were wising up. And what saved my life was there was a priest there. He's not there anymore. But there was a priest there who was in recovery for years. I won't say his name. But he picked up on it because he had been in recovery for years. And he kind of took me under his wing and said, I have some questions for you. Okay. Well, it was like 12 questions. I didn't realize it was like the 12 questions where like, kind of like the questionnaire that some people answer in like 12-step recovery fellowships, where if you say yes more than 4 times, you might have a problem. I had to lie to keep it under 9. And he would start asking me these questions about my drinking, and I'm like, and I realized through this priest who had been where I was at years ago that I might have a problem. And because he was sharing from his own experience, and he got sober in a seminary in his 20s. Like he basically saw me as
He had your story.
Yeah. He was a guy that he started sharing some of those lies and some of that perfectionism and that trying to be everyone to everybody. That's what was going on. Was I was overextending myself in that community, trying to manufacture that I had to be everyone's best friend, I had to be perfect, and I had to be the life of the party all the time. And in the background was trying to, as best I could, to sneak drinks. And so this guy was speaking into my story to where I couldn't refute it, because he was the first person I had ever met, at least at that time. I'm like, wow, what you're sharing is what I'm feeling. So then I had to go into denial, right? Because I said, no, I don't have a problem. Well, so in the wintertime of 2015, this priest tasked me with some homework. I said, I have like 8 drinking parties, or 8 parties, Christmas parties, but they're going to be drinking parties to go to. What am I supposed to do? Because you say I have a problem, and I don't have a problem. So he said, well, okay, how about you go to half of them and just have 2 drinks? That's what normal people do. So if you don't have a problem, go to these half the parties you go to, only have 2, and the other half don't have any, and just see how you do. And again, liking a challenge, I said, okay, here we go. I couldn't do it. I'd go to these parties, I'd have 2.
And then you'd have 10.
And then I'm like, what do we do? So either I had 2 options. Either I had 10, or I just left and got to my vehicle and did what I wanted, because I couldn't function with just 2 drinks. And
you drank with the purpose.
Yeah. Well, people were, this is where I try, and you all could identify with this, is like, for me, if I was at a restaurant or a party and I was drinking and everyone else happened to be there.
Yeah.
Why, for the non-alcoholic, they're actually at a party and they happen to be drinking.
Right.
For me, it was the exact opposite. If you're there, great.
But I'm drinking.
But I'm really here for her, which is the bottle.
Yeah.
What'd you drink? Whatever.
I drank whatever. My primary drink was like single malt scotch.
Got it.
I was an expensive drunk.
Got it.
Macallan 15 was probably my favorite.
Okay.
But mainly whiskey. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was that winter time of December of 2015. I'm like, okay, this guy's wising up. This priest is, some different seminarians are starting to kind of call me out because my facade's starting to break down. This priest has called me out, but he's going to help me. He's like, I want to help you out. Okay. And so I kind of have this program, like, okay, just try to control it. So I would say my first whole year at Conception was a awareness that there might be a problem, but I'm going to learn how to control it. Right? And if you have to try to make a program to control something, it's a beautiful indication you've lost control of something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think everyone's done that. I think every alcoholic.
I'm going to try to manage this better than the next person. And it's always easier to look at the other person who's doing way worse than you and be like, at least I'm not that guy.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But that's my saving grace right now, is I'm not him. That guy's got a real problem. You go to parties or you go around people that you're doing the same crap, and you're like, man, can you believe so-and-so?
Right.
He's out of control.
Well, and for me, it was like, I'm squeaky clean. I'm young. I'm at a seminary. I'm going to be a Catholic priest. Like, I thought the alcoholic is under a bridge was drinking Sterno. Right. Like, I thought that's him. I'm not. Because I'm also in all these events. I'm like in the student body, different structures. Still got the great grades.
You're still excelling.
I'm still excelling.
Yeah.
My guardian angel's probably doing like double time.
Oh, yeah.
And, but where it started to finally break down even more was June 9th of 2016. That's when I first admitted I couldn't control it. So, again, I'm still in kind of like...
That's actually a big step.
Yes. Oh, it's huge.
And do you remember the moment
Yes.
where it like dawned on you, were like, I can't control this?
Right. So I was a dear friend of mine. He lives in Kansas City, Kansas. He invited me. So I was still trying to do the whole 2 drinks. That was my new control thing, was 2 drinks. And so this friend of mine, he's like, hey, you want to go to a Mexican restaurant with me? And then we'll go to watch a boxing match on TV or something. I was like, okay, sure. And so I go to the restaurant. And I'm like, okay, I'm allowed 2. Like, I'm still really trying to do this. And I'm finding out I was able to maintain only having 2, or either completely failed every single time, or I was extremely angry and sarcastic and rude. I mean, I just couldn't be happy and moderately drinking at the same time. So that's really what was going on. And so this friend of mine said, okay, let's go to this restaurant. And he's like, hey, before we get our table, do you want to have a drink? I was like, oh, sure. So there's one. And then the table was taking forever. She's like, you want to have another one? I'm like, sure. So there's 2. So I'm like, okay, I already made my quota. However, I'm allowed 2 at a meal. We haven't started the meal yet, so I still get 2.
You start making concessions.
Yeah.
It's a low negotiation.
So I get to the rest. We sit down, and I have 2 more drinks with my meal, so now I'm up to 4. And so then I go to his house. And these were all like whiskey sours or something. So then we go to his house, and we're going to watch this boxing match. He's like, hey, you want some tequila? I'm like, sure. He's like, do you want a glass of wine? Sure. Hey, I got some vodka that's old. I don't want it. Do you want it? Sure. So I started drinking vodka. And then it was after the vodka. Like I said, it was just anything he had. I was like, sure, I'm just drinking it. And it was actually, as soon as he offered me that vodka and I started drinking it right out of the bottle, I realized, like that moment of clarity, I can't say no. I'm like, I don't know how to say no. Because like he's in Kansas City, Kansas. Over the summer, seminarians are given different assignments to work at. I'm actually living in Independence.
And he knows you're in the seminary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But for him, I'm just a friend that.
Well, you don't think so? I mean, I'm going to go be naive and I don't think a guy in the seminary is going to have a drinking problem.
Right.
He's getting ready to take the walk, or he's at least immersed in faith.
Right.
You don't think that's the last thing that's going to hit my mind.
So I'm like freaking out. Like, wow, I can't tell this guy no, and I'm literally just drinking anything he gives me. And so then the night ends, and he's like, okay, well, I'll see you next time, And so I'm hammered, and I'm driving from Kansas City, Kansas, back to where I live in Independence.
That's a hike.
Yeah. And it's like the middle of the night, and I'm like scared. I mean, I'm sure it's like where you realize you're in trouble. So you think you're driving normally, but you're probably going like 20 miles per hour on the interstate and just really trying to act like you're driving like a normal person.
Like if I drink with one eye open, I'll stop seeing double.
Right. And or if I lean this way and have the window down, then the breeze will help sober me up. Like that's
Yeah.
And you're smoking Pall Malls the whole time. Yeah. And so that freaks me out. And so that scares me enough that I say I'm gonna go call that number that priest told me to, which happened to be the number of like an AA group, and it was the hotline for AA. So I call the hotline for AA at like 1 a.m.
So you made it home.
Made it home.
Okay.
And I get back into my room, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to call this AA hotline. So I call the hotline, and it's some guy named Bob. And he's like, oh, this is Bob. What can I help? I'm like, I don't know. What do I do next? I was told to call you. I'm calling you. Now what? And so he's like, okay. So we chat. He stays on the line for a long time. And he says, where do you live? I told him I was living in Independence at the time. And he's like, okay, well, we have, and I was also working all day at this summer job till about 5:30 p.m. So he's like, well, how about there's a meeting really close to where you live that meets every evening at 7. You should go every day. Like, okay, I can do that. Like, it was like I was so scared. I'm like, okay, I can do this. So I go to my first meeting, and
where's the seminary in this now?
So this is during the summer between seminary years. So I'm still a seminarian.
So you don't go all year round.
No.
Okay.
It's like a school year schedule. So
got it.
During the summer, usually you're given some sort of ministry job or you're doing something. So I'm just working like this ministry job in Independence. And so I go to my first meeting, and like nobody has any teeth.
Oh shit.
It's a smoking meeting. Everyone's smoking Pall Malls, and I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know what to do because I didn't really know what the problem was.
You can find at least 5-10 people in there that's got a way worse problem.
Right. And so I think I'm like under half the age of everyone else in the room. And all I could really discern at that time was you say your name, you're an alcoholic, and you smoke Pall Malls. So I bought a pack of Pall Malls thinking, okay, I'm going to do what they do. So I would sit in this room every evening, and I would say, I'm Mark, I'm an alcoholic, and smoke a Pall Mall. I'm like, somehow this is going to help. Like, that's how foggy my thinking was. And I loved it. I started going to meetings every day, and this homespun wisdom of this spirituality is, this recovery spirituality. I'm like, man, these people are kind of cool. Like, but in my mind, I'm like, but man, we're all so wounded and broken with addiction. But man, at least these people, they're not drinking or drugging today, And I fell in love with recovery culture, that fellowship, but I wasn't working a program. I was just sitting in the room, and that kept me going. It kept me dry.
How long?
So That I started going every day, and I was dry from June 9th to my sobriety date, which was November 12th. So
you were dry for 5 months.
So for 5 months, I go to meetings every day, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm finally figuring this out, right? Like, you go to meetings, you say you're an alcoholic, you smoke Pall Malls, and you kind of try to take in some of this wisdom. But I wasn't working any steps. I didn't really surrender to God. And I, deep down, getting to the more deeper spiritual side of things.
How are you going to meetings while you're at the seminary?
I found some that were around, and that priest helped.
In Maryville?
Yeah.
Because it's right by Maryville.
There's Maryville, and there was one on the campus once in a while.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So they know you're going to meetings.
Now they know. Now it's way more public. When I entered the next fall of 2016, it became more known to like people like, okay, you know,
Mark's got a problem.
Mark's got a problem. This priest is helping him. He's doing okay. But deep down, I really wasn't doing okay because I was dry, but I was still having a lot of relationship issues. A lot of other wounds were coming up from my past, and just all these things were going on. And so November 12th, I was invited to speak at a parish here in the Northland on vocations. And as I was driving down from Conception Abbey to the city, I got this weird voice in my head. And the voice said, "You're going to speak at this parish. It's a Saturday night at a vigil mass. It's going to go well." I'm like, great. Thank you, God. Like, I'm great. And then they're going to offer you a drink. What are you going to do? And I got deathly afraid because I already knew that I don't know what I'm going to do.
You didn't have a system in place that where
Right.
you could say, you know, these are my objections to what you're going
Right.
to offer me.
Because this priest knew, some of my friends kind of knew some stuff, but I'm still kind of a hot mess. And I didn't, for myself, truly, looking back, I hadn't truly accepted the fact that
You're an alcoholic.
I'm an alcoholic. I just thought I'd go to these meetings, you know. And so I speak at this church. It goes well. The priest and
And it's one in the Northland? Where were you at?
it was Holy Family.
Oh, yeah, right over there off North Oak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, no, he was already passed away. Go on, never mind.
So I speak at Holy Family. It goes great. And then some parishioners invite, I don't know anyone. So the parishioners say, "Hey, do you want to come over and have supper? You want to go out to a restaurant?" Sure. And it happens. I'm at this restaurant, and they say, "Hey, can we get you something to drink?" My history says probably shouldn't do that. My body was like, don't do it. My brain was like going crazy. And my mouth said, "Oh, yeah, it'd be great." And they said, "What do you want?" "Anything you want." And so I said, "Okay, I want a double shot of Macallan 15
Shit. You've been sober for how long?
since June."
So you're still now you're 5 months sober, and now you're drinking a double.
Right. And
One thing I teach you, and
yeah,
is you don't pick up as if you're starting over again.
Right.
You pick up where you left off.
where you left off.
Yeah.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's probably why people who are into more serious stuff overdose when
Right.
because they start out where they left off
Right.
and they
Because when you're sober, your addiction's doing push-ups in the parking lot. I mean, it's not getting any weaker,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's waiting on you. And so I had 3 of those
oh Jesus.
before I really wisened up. And I'm like, what am I doing? And the scotch is good scotch. I mean, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
The whole time it tasted like terrible. Like, because I had so much shame and confusion. I'm like, this I can't enjoy this.
Right.
This is awful.
Well, yeah, because you don't forget what you've heard or what you've learned.
Right, because I was hanging out with those people all the
Yeah.
time. So this is how denial works, because my first thought was, those dang real alcoholics, they ruined my evening.
Yeah.
Those real alcoholics, they couldn't do this, but they've convinced me over these last 5 months that I got a problem. So now I am with these perfectly good people drinking really good scotch, and I can't enjoy it because all those real alcoholics. That's how bad in denial I was. And then once I got off my pity party, I went to the priest and told him. I just opened up, just, threw up all of my brokenness and said, "I have no clue what I'm doing. I really think I need to just leave. I need to just walk away from this whole thing."
So it was your idea to leave.
Yeah.
I thought they made you.
Well,
leave.
it became mutual.
Okay.
But I got a beautiful insight right at that moment, though, too. Because then the priest said, well, how about, they were kind of saying, okay, yeah, we know you're still called to be a priest. Like, that was the hard, they said, we know you're still called to be a priest, but not right now. Not right now. You got to get some help. And it wasn't even so much that they like put me in rehab or prescribed anything. It was just like, yeah, we still think you're a good man, that you have a lot of talents, that, maybe one day you'll be a good priest, but you just need to walk away. And so when that all came down to it, when that decision was all made, I sat before the Blessed Sacrament in the tabernacle of the church.
And really, at this point in your life, you've had nothing but success in everything
Right.
you've done.
This was like my first time of really being told, like, game's up.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting before the Blessed Sacrament, the tabernacle, and I said, God, I'm done. Like, I'm broken. I'm confused. I thought I've done everything right. I now know I have a problem, and I'm just told there's the door, but you're still called to be a priest. That was the hardest thing for me to really accept, was on the one hand, they said, we know you're still called to be a priest. On the other hand, but you got to leave. So I was sitting there like, well, what am I going to do? But in the moment of that prayer, I told the Lord, I said, I'm going to shut my eyes and just let you talk.
Just listen.
Yep. And the word I got was gift. He said, you've been gifted with addiction. And that was confusing. So I thought, how the hell is this a gift? And it really, and here's the reason, and it confuses a lot of people when I speak in recovery circles about that, like, how is this a gift? It's only a gift when you're sober and you can share your experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
That's a big, big deal.
right.
That's a big deal. That is a big deal for an addict that's currently in recovery, right? And maybe it's their first day to then also be able to look at you and say, look at what this guy's done. Look at where he's at now,
Right.
which is one of the big reasons I wanted you on here. I'm like, man, people have to hear this story. I mean, it's huge.
I think also when it comes to sharing your gift, and I want you to elaborate on that, but I think some who enter into recovery start that practice of sharing their gift with others prior to actually being recovered, to where the pressure of sharing causes them to go back to using again. So it's like, I'm interested to hear when you started sharing your
Right. Well, it was not immediately.
Yeah.
It was just, for me, it was that sense of like, I felt God was like, you've been gifted with this. And because what I realized was, yes, I was going to meetings. I liked the homespun wisdom. I thought these people are kind of cool. But I kept viewing it in this big, dark cloud of, you're a broken POS that's still not a man, that's still unworthy of love. And now you can't even drink to cope with it. Like, that was actually going on, I guess, I found out that was the narrative going on the whole time. Was
You're bound by it.
right. It was, but he completely flipped it around and said, no, actually, this is what I'm gifting you with, but it's only a gift when you're sober and can one day share it with those who still suffer. And from that moment on, I had to leave the seminary, right? That wasn't good. There was no negotiation.
Did you go to rehab?
No.
now.
So here's
the scripture. The scripture that I'm thinking of that pops into my head, and I could be mistaken. I want to say Paul was given a gift by God that was served out by the devil.
Well, no. So he had to paraphrase it, like he had that thorn in his side,
Right.
That he had prayed that would go away,
Right.
and basically God said, like, he would not remove that thorn, that he would not remove whatever that was, and people have speculated what that was,
Right.
Because he said, my power will be made perfect in weakness,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we're called to do, as people, all of us, regardless what our thorn is that if we surrender it to God, then that in your weakness, his power will flow.
Yeah.
And so I leave seminary, and that's my bottom, because it's not just the bottom of my pride. It's the bottom of, now I have to go somewhere. So kind of asked about the rehab piece, was I didn't know what to do. And so that priest, who I credit with really helping me, he actually, for a week, said, I want you to go to the Abbey in Atchison, Kansas, the Benedictine monastery in Kansas. And I effectively just, some people need medical help, right? Medical inpatient rehab. I didn't have that. What happened for me was I was sent to the monastery at Atchison, and for a week, I just stayed in that community and sweated and shook it out. And had one guy like on watching me the whole week.
So you did have withdrawals then?
Yes. So I was just in this community for a week and
Yeah.
just.
Are you still 22 at this time?
That would have been, I was 23.
20. Okay, so this is, we've got a year's gone by.
Right.
Okay.
And so that week's going by, and it's like my moment of feeling absolutely awful, right? But they're taking care of me. They probably don't even remember this because they probably get so many people, right? But for a week, I'm in this monastery, and all I have is my belongings, a guitar, a Bible, a big book, and the shakes, right? And I actually ended up writing 7 songs in that time because where I realized all that shame was gone. Like that young boy that liked to write songs and play music that never felt like he was a real man. It was like the Lord's like, no, I want you to pursue that now. And so I just sat like with the DTs, just shaking and sweating it out, hardly able to eat. And I'm writing songs and I'm singing and I'm praying with the monks. And it's awful because my parents don't know where I'm at.
Oh, wow.
Because what I'm getting at is the seminary said, you need to leave. I was so ashamed and confused of what to do next. This priest sent me to Atchison.
So the priest from Maryville sent you to Atchison.
Yeah. And he was a priest that was currently on staff at Conception. Now he's not there.
Right.
Yeah. And my parents have no idea. They think I'm just having a great time.
In Maryville, Missouri.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at the end of that week, I go home. And my folks are like, what's going on? And it was the hardest part of my entire life because on the one hand, they have no clue. They have no clue I was drinking at 12. They have no clue I was sneaking drinks in high school. They have no clue that I was, drinking around the clock in college. They have no idea I was trying to somehow still make that work at seminary.
You're the trophy son.
Right. And then I'm now the one that's discerned out / dismissed from a Catholic seminary for a problem they have no idea existed. And that's where I try to tell people my parents aren't culpable for any of that. Right? Like there is no shame because most parents, they would hear that and say, what did we do? They did nothing wrong. Nothing at all.
Yes, most people have this story, whether they had a bad parent,
Right.
And here, at the end of the day, we didn't either.
No, it was.
I mean,
also my will as a willful individual to just pursue what I knew was wrong.
No, we had great
Right.
parents. I mean, a dad who, 100%, is a huge reason why we are where we're at
Right.
today. Spiritually, mentally, a
Right.
great dad,
Right.
great mom. Great family.
Yeah, and so it broke their hearts because they're like, what do we do? Because we were like the picture perfect family. And now you have this, and they said, well, how do we help you? We don't know you. And I said, no, like we're gonna build this back up. And this is where my view of priesthood changed. This is more on the priesthood side. A lot of young men, when they enter seminary, they have a very particular version of what they say. Well, when I'm a priest, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be this type of priest. And when I first entered out of college, maybe all intellectual, thought I'm going to win debates and just preach the truth and convert the world, right? That was my version of priesthood. Well, after that year and a half where I'm told there's the door, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm physically a wreck. I'm like, I don't know what's next. And so I tell people, if you're confused at what your next season in life is, just take the next possible step. Just do the next thing. And the next thing for me was I got home.
The next right thing.
The next right thing. I went to meetings in the back of my home Carrollton area every day. And I became a substitute teacher. And I worked on the farm. And I worked at a YMCA for a few months. I'm like, I just had to do something. And it was actually when I started taking care of my health again. because
There was some point where, and I don't want to stop you, but I want to get there, where you mentioned going to jail. I'm assuming we'll get there, or have we passed
working in jail. We're getting there.
Okay.
So I leave seminary at the end of 2016,
You leave seminary, you go to Atchison,
and then I go
you
home.
dry out, you go home,
Go
you
home.
disclose to your parents what's going on.
Right.
You keep going to meetings,
And I'm just doing odd stuff for a
and now
while.
you're just doing odd stuff.
Just doing odd stuff.
How long does that last?
That goes till April. So for about
November 12th, your sobriety day.
right till about early winter of 2017, right? I'm just doing odd jobs trying to get my life back, right? And then I start this monk, spiritual director of mine, who's from Conception. He was a monk. We would FaceTime each other after that because I wasn't gonna visit him because I'm not on the premises.
Right.
He was with me a lot. He's like FaceTiming me every day, saying, "Hey, you need to get in the gym every day." That was actually his first. He's like, "I want you to go to a 12-step meeting every day. I want you to work out every day."
What the first step
Mm-hmm.
is to admit you're an alcoholic.
Yep. We admit we were powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable.
So it's not that you're calling yourself an alcoholic. You admit you're powerless over alcohol.
Right.
Correct. So that first step isn't calling yourself.
And there's really a hyphen there. If you look at the step as it's written, it's we admit we were powerless over alcohol, hyphen, and our life was unmanageable. Most people interpret that step as all encompassing. I knew, if you remember back in the story, I actually knew I was probably powerless over alcohol in June. When that guy at that boxing match said, like, he kept giving me drinks. That's when I did the first half.
right.
I knew actually probably at that point
that you're powerless.
powerless over. I wouldn't admit my life was unmanageable until I got kicked out of seminary.
6 months later.
6 months. It wasn't until I had to leave seminary and start my life again that I really did accept my life was unmanageable.
So when you went to meetings,
Mm-hmm.
you said, "Hi, I'm Mark."
And I'm an alcoholic.
And do you agree with having to call yourself an alcoholic?
I tell myself that in that context, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. You know,
It doesn't define you, but it is
No.
a part of you.
It's yeah.
I mean,
You know,
it's
and
what it is, what it
I've
is.
translated that into like think about if our parish, like your average, whether it's a Christian church or a Catholic parish, think about if you viewed it as we're all sinners in recovery. Right? Mortal sin. See, in the Catholic world, we have mortal sin and venial sin. What if you said mortal sin's like your low bottom drunk? Venial sin's your high bottom drunk. But you're not sitting there trying to say, well, at least I'm not that guy. You identify and not compare, right?
Right.
What if our communities of faith viewed the way we are journeying towards wholeness from sin, the same way people journey towards wholeness from addiction, right? And so I worked these odd jobs, and this monk friend of mine said, hey, you have nothing but time. Because usually the policy for any diocese is you have to have 2 years of continuous sobriety to reapply. So I knew, okay, I got some time on my hands. And I worked a few months with a group called the Glen Mary Home Missionaries. They do construction work in the South for the poor in rural Appalachia. Just a nice experience. I only bring that up because it was during that went from April until, like, that was a few months gig. I only bring that up because when I was working with them, they sent me to East Tennessee. So I'm living in Tennessee doing little odd job construction jobs for the poor people in Appalachia. Beautiful people that changed my life just working with the poor. But I bring that up because while I'm there, my monk friend again said, hey, I got another gig for you. He's basically trying to keep me doing something in the church, right? He's like, I got a gig for you might really like. It's called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, which the Jesuits are like a religious order. The Volunteer Corps is like lay people who just want to work with marginalized populations. And he's like, you can apply, if you apply right now, I know you're working another job, but if you apply now, you can work for them for a whole year from August of 2017 to August of 2018. And I think you'd enjoy this. I'm like, okay, sure. I have nothing to refute him. I have nothing else to do with my life. So I apply, and it's a reverse interview. This is where God moves, because the reverse interview means you just say, I'm interested. And you give them all your resume, your job experience, your applications, which part of my application was what just happened in seminary. And then they tell
So you don't withhold.
no, I'm
You're an open book.
I'm an open book. That's when I really started being an open book about everything, right? And they said, oh, and what happens is you just give them all your documents, and they say, here's 3 ministries throughout the U.S. we want you to interview with, and then depending on the interview, we'll tell you which one you get. So you're not necessarily picking your job. They're kind of just guiding you through this process. And in the midst of that, they said, you got a job. Good. You're going to start in August of 2017. Good. Where am I going? They said, you're going to go to Mobile, Alabama. I didn't know where that was. I mean, it's like in the bottom of Alabama by the Gulf. Okay, got it. What's the job? And they said, you'll be working as the chaplain at a level 5 county jail.
What's level 5?
There's 5 levels with correctional institutions. Level 5 is maximum security.
Oh, you got the worst of the worst.
Yeah. And in terms of a jail. And there's 5,000 men there, and you're going to be their chaplain. And I thought, whoa, like, no, I won't. And I was like, they said, no, we decided since, you're in seminary, you're kind of you have like a ministry bent. Even in your application, you said you want to be a priest someday. So this would be a great experience for you. So we think this is meant for you. You could take it or leave it. Like there was no other option. And I thought, and this is what I told the guys at the football retreat. I was like, I don't have what it takes. That was the line. I don't have what it takes. I thought I'm just a country boy I'm still a hot mess, especially. I'm in a very fragile time of life where I really don't know what I'm good at.
And you've only been sober for 10 months.
Yeah.
So now you have to interpret your emotions and your sobriety.
Right. And I'm like, I've never got arrested. I've largely kind of still out, besides having to leave seminary, a pretty squeaky clean type of existence overall, really. And I thought, I don't have what it takes. And I always tell people, if you don't think you have what it takes to pursue what God's calling you to do, then just take what you have. If you don't think you have what it takes, take what you do have, your own experience, your own education, your own personality, whoever you are, and just be where your feet are. Just go there completely 100 and let God do the rest. Because someone that looks like me going into a Southern Alabama jail
with maniacs.
Right.
That are probably all in there for what? I mean, they
all
got
sorts of stuff.
Right. Rape, murder.
Right. And I thought, what's someone like they're really going to listen to me? Squeaky clean Catholic dude from Missouri, right? And it completely changed my life. So I go down there in August of 2017. And
isn't that always how it is? It's like God sends you someplace and it's like, you go, I'll equip.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy because you still have to process the uncertainty of it.
Yeah.
But
because I show up and there's 2 other main chaplains. One is this really swole, bald headed, like black dude, he's cool looking guy, deep voice, let's go, right? He's the main chaplain.
Someone that they'd at least be scared of.
Right. and then the other main chaplain is 6'5", ancient guy that's worked in jail for 50 years. So he just has the historical cred.
Right.
They both got cred.
Right. Well,
what you're saying, right. in their own right, they've got some cred.
And then I joined the team, and they're like, you're Catholic? What does that mean? There's no sense of, they have no idea what that means, and they think, oh, you're a minister, okay. And I walk in, and we had a GED classroom. So what started, so now we're in the jail part, right? So I move into this county jail, and I know I'm going to be there a year. And so what happens is every day I would go to a 6 a.m. 12-step meeting. There was a meeting that started at 6 a.m. Sunday through Saturday.
Now you weren't leading it; you were
no.
part
I'm
of it.
just going, right?
Okay.
So every morning I go to this 12-step meeting. I drive to jail. I go into the jail, and you have no idea what's going to happen. Some days I'm just teaching. We had a GED classroom where we try to help some of these men get a GED, and so I'm teaching, science, math, reading. It's kind of like okay. Some days I'm going through all the cell blocks, and when you preach, you're yelling just so they don't yell back, and you're just getting after it. I'm a lot more calm at mass than I have to be.
You got to know your audience,
right? Yeah. And so the first time I ever went into the cell block and preached was one of the most profound moments of my life, because I'm brand new. Their job is to break the new kid. That's their job. And I understood that was their job. It's like a hyper masculine environment. And I'm still very new in accepting who I am as a man of God, right? And I just think, God, you have got to work through me. And I just get after it. And I loved it because on any given day, yes, there were the fights. There was the people trying to commit suicide. There were attempted murders. There were stuff going on, just the brokenness of that environment. But in sharing life with those men, I always walked out feeling like the man who was healed from my own. Like, everyone has imprisonment in their life. Some of those men are behind real bars. Some of us are behind the bars of pride or avarice or greed or ego. And we try to hide it behind nice suits and stuff, right?
Right.
And so what those men taught me was nobody is beyond the redeeming power of Christ, and all of us can learn from each other, right? And one of the crazy moments, and this is where it was just bizarre, was one day there was this man that wanted me to like pray over him. So I'm like, he's like in front of me and I'm like going like this, praying that, oh Lord Jesus, I hope you be with this man, whatever. And this other guy's like tripping on something. And he's like, from me to Andrew, and he's just like barking, like yelling and screaming, like he's going to kill the new chaplain. I mean, he's just going after it. And I'm kind of like, oh no. And this guy looks up, he's like, don't worry, chap. If he takes one more step, I'll kill him. So keep going. And I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, but it just convicted me, like this culture of, and it's not all romantic. Like I will never romanticize working in corrections. I will also not make it sound worse than it was either, right? It's just what it is. But I loved that ministry because those men, either they didn't want to see you and they were going to fight you in every moment, or because they were so broken down by the world, they were open to what you were bringing with the gospel. And then another beautiful part about that year was there was a gentleman I became friends with, who was a minister at the state penitentiary death row unit. And he said, hey, chaplain, would you ever want to tour death row? He's like, I go to death row every Saturday. I would love if you you seem to really love working in the jail. Would you ever want to come visit the men there? And I, sure, because I actually thought maybe this is why God took me out of Missouri. Maybe this is why God made me leave seminary, because I was meant to be a corrections chaplain down here. And that would have never happened if I was still in seminary. And so then he's inviting me to go visit the death row unit. And you still had to do the training. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go tour death row some Saturday with this guy. Well, what really happened was one day, like at 4 a.m, this guy calls me. My phone goes off at 4 a.m. and it's this guy. And he's like, hey, are you ready for that tour? I was like, sure, but why are you calling me so early? Well, we're going to go today. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, they're doing a retreat. I told the facility, you, me, and 2 other guys would do a retreat for the men on death row starting at 6 a.m. and it'll go till about 2 p.m. And so, yeah, get up. I'm going to pick you up. I'll be at your place in about half an hour.
That's just not a visit. That's
not a visit. That's not a tour.
No.
Now I'm doing a retreat for these men that I've never been to with basically perfect strangers.
And have no idea what to expect.
No idea what to expect.
Yeah.
And I was like, what am I supposed to do? He's like, well, the inmates on death row wear all white, so wear no white and bring your Bible and love Jesus. Okay, see you in half an hour.
Bring breakfast.
And I thought, okay, so maybe this was like fortuitous. I'm like, okay, don't wear white. So I wore all black. So that's where it started, right? I was like, okay, now they're not going to mistake me for an inmate. I grabbed my Bible and I was like, and bring Jesus. Okay, so I'm sitting in the car with this guy I've only met once. And we go to the facility. 2 other guys join me. There's a guy with a guitar and a guy named Todd. That's all I remember. And we go through all this security, which the security doesn't scare me at this point because I'm going through security every day at the county jail. And so we go through security, and then at that facility, you turn left in this corridor for general population. You turn right for death row. And we turn right, and in big above these glass doors says death row unit. And that's when it hits me. God, what did you do with my life? I'm just a farm boy that's still trying to, I think I'm meant to be a priest. And I'm walking in with 3 strangers onto a death row unit with no clue of what I'm even going to say when I get in there. And that it's just one of those moments. I'm like, how the heck what am I doing with my life? My visits with those men changed my life completely because I went in there.
So you visit with them one-on-one.
No, it was the whole group. So
Oh,
what we would do on these retreats is we were allowed clearance to where we had this little room, maybe the size of this one, with like a few chairs and stuff, and they could come in shifts, and we would have we would sing a song, we'd let them share their life, and because they were hungry to share. So it was never like one-on-one, it was in a group setting with these other men.
Are we all right, Drew? Okay.
And so I would visit with those men, and what was amazing was, even though you don't go to death row for weed, right? Like they're there for a lot of things. I never felt unsafe, and that struck me about halfway through the retreat. Was I'm just shaking hands with these guys. They want to sing hymns, so we're singing hymns, and then they're hungry to share because they're kind of in solitary a lot, right? Like they're not social. They aren't used to seeing people from the free world. And so it was an easy retreat because I just said, hey, they want to know anything about anything going on in the world. Or I would just say, I'd read a scripture passage and say, well, how does this resonate with you? And they would just open up, right? Like it was beautiful and quite easy actually to do a retreat. It's kind of like the opposite of working with high schoolers, where high schoolers, they don't want to talk at all. These men were starving to talk to somebody different, which was me. And they would just share their life, and they would just share what they've done and what they were, either some were really repentant, some were so sorry for what they did. Some weren't. But they shared with me their life. And like I said, halfway through that day, I'm like, I kind of forgot where I was because I'm just having a great time.
How were you able to discern who was genuinely sorry and who was, full of it? Were some of them trying to convey to you that they were sorry and they actually weren't?
Yeah, I mean, some try to play you. But really, the ones that really didn't want to see you, they would just stay away, right? They just I don't want to put up with you, And so that changed my life working there for that whole year. Like I said, that became what I did. We're recovery in the morning, go to the jail Monday through Friday. Saturday morning, I had a few more opportunities to visit the men at that death row unit. And I thought, wow, this is exactly what the Lord has for me.
Did any of them, were you ever in a situation where you met them and before you left, they were executed?
When I was there was, I believe, I don't know how many. Probably in my year there, 2 men I think were executed. I wasn't there for that because I was a volunteer weekend type chaplain. But there were 2.
So you never had to watch it?
No, I wouldn't have had clearance to go in. That was more like the official people.
How were they executed in Alabama?
When I was there, they did the cocktail where the different drugs.
Lethal injection.
Yeah, lethal injection. And they were just now. They probably at that moment they were really starting to decide if they also would give the option of a gas. Kind of a sleeping gas that put him to sleep.
And then they would inject.
Mm-hmm. And so that year, I always say it ruined my life for the better because 90% of my day was spent with either people in recovery, people who were in jail, and there was also this ministry I was affiliated with part-time that worked with people coming out of correctional facilities that were homeless. And so, like I said, that year was one of the most life-changing years of my life because, again, recovery, incarcerated individuals, homeless individuals, and I was able to bring the gospel to them and share life with them, and it changed the way I viewed what I was meant to do as a Christian man, what I was meant to do as a priest. And I still felt called to be a priest that whole year. And so I get to the end of that year of service, was August of 2017 until August of 2018. And
you're going on 2 years now of sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
That November
right.
will be 2 years.
And so I'm talking to the diocese up here, and as I was sharing basically you could say a progress report. Like, hey, since I left seminary, here's what I've been doing. You know, working different ministries. I've been sober. I've been doing all this, to where by the grace of God, they actually, and they have the authority to do this. They said, we will take you back in August.
The following August.
So instead of August of 2018, so they were going to reduce.
Oh, they'll take you back early.
Right. They were willing to take me back early.
3 months early.
Right. And so all of a sudden they said, well, given everything you've been doing, I mean, like, it was beautiful because because there was that moment, actually, kind of like the first moment whenever I got the call from HR and Jesus got in the way. I had a similar moment where I was in conversation throughout that year with the diocese because they wanted just updates. How you doing? They were very grateful that I was in communication with them. They were impressed by the ministry work I was doing. And so there was starting to shape up that they might let me back in early. And I thought, okay, but then I thought, what about this, what I'm doing now? Like, I thought, I love what I'm doing. I love this area of the country. I love working in corrections. And I remember actually I kind of had that moment all over again where I was sitting on my porch having a cigar with Jesus. That's what I did every evening. And I said, okay, Lord, are you really calling me back to be a priest? Or am I meant to stay here and just live in Mobile, work in jail and prison? And I realized then what I call the sacramental depth of the Catholic priesthood, because I preached the word of God every day, but I couldn't give them the word made flesh in the Eucharist. I heard a lot of confessions in a variety of contexts, right? But I didn't absolve any sins. And I feel like the Lord's like, I gave you this experience so that this is the style of ministry you bring wherever you go. And you will always have these men and women in mind. You will never forget those who are imprisoned, who are addicted, who are homeless, because you will carry them with you, because we all struggle with that in our own way. And so at the end of 2017, or the end of July of 2017, I ended that year of service and re-entered seminary with the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph in August 2018. They agreed to shorten that period of time so I could go back early. And it was just amazing. And what was really amazing, and I don't think the diocese would be aware of this, was the date of the date of the letter where they said we're willing to have you back was on the 12th, which my sobriety date is on the 12th. And there was just that idea, it was a different month, but that idea of the 12th of November sobriety date, the official, because here's the thing, what happened. My sobriety date was November 12th. The official day I got my letter from the diocese saying you're no longer with us, by the time that whole process happened, was December 12th of 2016. That's just because with the paperwork and stuff. Mm-hmm. It was December 12th, that next time, that I got that letter saying you're back, that we're willing to have you back.
Wow, how cool would it have been if we scheduled this tomorrow?
I know. Right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. And so it was just absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. And I came back in 2018. And I never really lost that love for the men and women that society deems irredeemable, because I went to seminary. They sent me to Cincinnati, Ohio. And there was some opportunities to go to correction facilities out there. So I was able to visit, I think, 3 different facilities out there, not to near the extent I did in Alabama, but was still able to make some visits to some of the people out there and help with when we had a mass or, visit men, have a Bible study out there. Went to different recovery fellowships out there. When I first came, I had spent another summer up here in the diocese. I went to the prison in St. Joe one summer and visited men in that prison up there. And so it's something that right now my current assignment doesn't really have a lot of margin to really go into those places. But I still really love that. And so I try to keep kind of in my mindset that idea of seeking out whether the addicted, the imprisoned, the homeless, and keep that going. And then to bring that style of ministry to wherever, when I work with high schoolers, not that high schoolers are like inmates, right? But they're young men and women who might be struggling with stuff I struggled with when I was their age. Or I met men behind bars that did things that I had done. I had men in there that I met that killed someone while, drunk driving. And I had done that so many times. Or
Right.
people who were in there for substance abuse issues or whatever it is, right? And to know, like, there was one thing that really struck me was I was working with a juvenile area of the jail. And this gentleman, which was like 19, and this 19-year-old started tearing up whenever I was just talking to him and ministering to him. And he said, like, where were you when I was 12? He's like, where was a man like you when I was 12? And I realized, like, well, that's when I started drinking, right? Now, he wasn't in there for drinking, but just that idea of, like, these young men needed father figures. And that's what helped me. When people ask me, like, okay, now, you're a priest, you're celibate, you're a spiritual father, but you're not like a biological father. How do you deal with that? And I said, we live in a culture today that is fatherless, largely a fatherless culture. There are men out there who don't have, either they have a poor father figure, an absent father figure, or some of the men behind bars didn't have fathers. One of the beauties of, for me, being a Catholic priest in the celibate state was you have a lot of men out there whose biological fathers aren't there. And there's someone like me that, given my state in life, can be a father to so many. Now I'm a young dad, right? I got a lot to learn, right?
Sure, yeah,
But
right.
for me, that's one of the beautiful ways I understand celibacy, and as my call to be a priest is I'm there to help fill that gap of fatherlessness. Because, on any given day, what most people call me is father.
Right.
So it's kind of like that. That's my call. When people say, what's it mean to be a priest? Don't complicate it. Be a dad. Be a spiritual dad.
Right.
That's good.
So I know that's a lot, but that's kind of that last piece before I entered seminary again.
Oh, that's great. So through seminary, did your struggle with addiction kind of subside? Was this something that was? Did you still continue to go to 12-step meetings, or do you ever get that? I guess when you define yourself, or you say that you're an alcoholic, the battle never stops.
Right.
You still have to have your guard up.
Mm-hmm.
Did that kind of thing, was the battle? Have you had the battle, the thoughts post seminary since you've been a priest, and how? I mean, obviously you have a different. You're in a different place in your life. You've learned your lessons, but there's always that seed of doubt that can come back.
Yeah. So I have to continue to work on my sobriety, right? Like I'm never finished, right?
Right.
And so there have been moments, both at the seminary after I came back, not so much an early priesthood yet, but there are moments where like I realize I have got to continue to work my program. Like I still go to meetings. I listen to a lot of recovery podcasts. I still have a sponsor I talk to every week. Still work the steps, People, when they realize I'm in recovery, they notice in my preaching, like, oh yeah, I use a lot of recovery principles.
Yeah.
And those things. Yeah, I've continued because I realized, like, for me, I can't just say, oh, that was then, and now I'm free. You're free, but it's a daily freedom, right? A spiritual reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, right? A daily reprieve.
Yeah.
And so I've never lost sight of that. And when I do, like if I happen to have a really busy week at the parish and at the schools and at the hospital, and I go like a week or two and I miss meetings, or I'm not talking to my sponsor, or I feel off.
Sure.
And that's where something I actually started to do again. It's a small little thing, and I don't have it on me today, was when I hit 7 years, November 12th, I finally got one of those chips.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because I used to think like, oh, I don't need those anymore. But I realized like, no, it's actually a good reminder.
Yeah.
And so it's like to continue to work my program. And I think that confused, like, well, you've been sober 7 years. Like there's this beautiful, lovely lady that I'm friends with who supports me a lot. And I still go to meetings, still read 2 pages of the big book every day, and still work program and call my sponsees. And she's like, well, she didn't understand it. she's like, well, if you've been sober 7 years, why do you keep going to meetings? And she's a Catholic. And I said, well, how long have you been Catholic? She's like, well, since 1984. I was like, why do you keep going to mass? To continue to be nourished spiritually, right? To continue to be fed. And so, yeah, I still work my program. And the worst thing I can do is forget my past. And that's why I'm grateful that you have me here to share my story and share my journey, because I think sometimes, especially as a priest, and maybe even years down the road, like I've only been ordained since May. You know, I'm still a baby. I'm the baby priest in the diocese, right? But to learn to never be ashamed of your past and to share that, because those things I've shared today and some of those struggles I've had, when I can share them, you know, maybe sometimes in different ways, in the parish or at the school, that's how people relate, you know, that's how people identify. And so I continue to work that program all the time.
Yeah, I mean, those coping mechanisms, you know, I think it's just like anything. If you go, just like muscles atrophy, you know, by unused at times, you know, I think if you stop working the principles that you've learned and you've applied, mixed in with faith, then you're only more susceptible to succumbing to yourself. You know, at the core of addiction, I feel like it's a very selfish thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about me.
Well, that's like the ism, right? ISM, I, self, and me, right? We all have our isms. It's whenever those things that keep us all looking at the guy in the mirror and saying, "Oh yeah, you're the sin of the world," you know?
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, you know, that I is probably the center of depression. That I is the center of anxiety. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, at that retreat, you once mentioned like pride and anxiety both have I at the center.
Yeah.
I've used that in homily, so thank you.
I got it from Stephen Furtick, so don't worry about it.
You give him credit once, and that's
Right,
it.
that's what I was like.
That's his. He owns it.
Well, yeah, I was like, you know, I knew a guy that said this, and I was like, I'll tell you, you know, street cred to you on that. No.
But
Footnote.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's a very true statement. You know, the I, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it's 100% pride, it could be all kinds of mental illness that's surrounding that, and you know, once you just start pouring into others, a lot of that stuff can go away, which is probably why probably consciously that guy kept giving you assignments.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that monk kept giving me different stuff to do because he realized, like, I got to keep you out of your own head.
Right.
You know, because as you all are aware, we're like, if I go into my head by myself, it's like going into a back alley. I'm going to get beat up and mugged by the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So in that very fragile moment of my life, he said, I have got you he's got to get me poured out into other people's lives in service to where I'm not just still thinking. One thing I realized was, like, you know, victims don't get sober. Victims don't get sober. And something looking back as I was coming over here today, I thought, you know, I am so grateful that I have never once viewed myself as a victim of the circumstance.
And, you know, when I was under like I said, when I was using, I don't know that we could say that I was addicted, but when I was using, I never blamed anyone else for it. I mean, people very easily could have said, you know, oh, well, he went through this and he went through that, and he's drowning it with, you know, alcohol, drugs, women, whatever. I never felt that way. Now, maybe it was true subconsciously, right? But I never felt, oh, I lost my son, let's go drink and let's do drugs. And I never felt that way.
Right.
I think, like, for me, it almost seemed like, well, typically I would have workout in the morning, school all day, practice, then I was dad, then you had to study. So, you know, you tear your ACL, football's gone, your son dies of a brain tumor, he's gone, and I didn't know how to fill the time. That's kind of how I feel like I spiraled out of control. I just didn't know how to fill the time.
Right.
You know, now a psychologist may examine me and say, no, that really isn't the case. You were hiding something. Possible. Maybe it was both.
Right.
It could have been both.
Right.
You know, but the way I see it, I didn't know what to do with the time. And so, I mean, when you go from being athlete, student, dad to just being a student, shit, that's easy. There's all kinds of time on your hand. And I just filled it with, sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
That's how I filled it,
Yeah.
But who knows? Who knows? I mean, I can 100% tell you that there's a enormous demonic component to it. I can tell you the devil is way smarter than we are. Even the priest for 30 years, he's going to outsmart him. Sometimes.
Right.
It's a chess match.
Yeah.
You're constantly
Yeah.
playing. But the good thing about being discerned is if you make a bad move, you're like, shoot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And you can catch yourself and you can retrace your steps.
Right. And no one's ever you never make it. One of the worst things I can ever think is I've arrived.
Right.
That I've arrived and now I can just let my guard down.
No.
Right. And to view like we've mentioned, if I know days in ministry, if I have phenomenal encounters in the sacraments, with mass or confessions or teaching, I better be on guard because the devil's pissed.
100%.
And so you got to be vigilant, right? Is to know, because what I always tell people is we're in a world at war, spiritual warfare, right? But so we always think, but then we think, we're always in a battle. Well, we're in a battle day in, day out against sometimes ourselves, other people, ultimately the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? We're world at war, we're in the battle. But the bigger story is the love story of God wanting your heart and mind. And so what I'm getting at is those two stories have to be held together. The love story, that's the ultimate story of God coming for us and us responding to him. But the battle of that's what we experience. So if you find yourself in the midst of a rough day and you got, these thoughts coming in or you're up at 2 a.m., well, pretend if you were in war, you wouldn't question why. You're at war. You know why there's stuff. Hey, there's problems. So it's when you realize in our day-to-day lives, there's going to be those battles. But to know that deep down in the midst of it, God's still trying to pursue you. God's still trying to love you. That's what's helped me. That's been the context for me largely. And I view that's part of my life's journey now is to know, okay, I got those scars. I've got some experiences.
But look at who he used.
Yeah.
I mean, look at who he surrounded himself with. They were all look at, all of them had their own quote unquote story or scar.
Right.
Look at the Apostle Paul.
Right.
He was a murderer.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't done anything that bad.
Well,
at least.
and you think about it, when people struggle with, sometimes we priests are jackwagons, right? I was you know what? The first Pope, Peter, denied knowing who Christ was.
Yeah.
And guess what? Judas was part of the original 12. Mm-hmm. And so when I tell people, is that should show us that guess what? People that look like me are going to hurt people at times. And it's terrible. You know how many times I've spoken at things as folks, on behalf of anyone that looks like me, if you've ever been hurt or offended or insulted, I'm sorry. And so I'm wearing the brand the whole time, right? And so to say but people, I try to tell people if you get hurt by the church, if you get hurt by a priest, if you have a bad encounter with a priest, first pray for that guy. Number 2, don't leave the church. Why? Because you don't leave Peter because Judas was at the table too.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And at the end of the day, the entire church never is going to harm you. It's that person who's interpreting the church, right? So, I have hold on, how do I want to say it? Because I wouldn't say I have an argument with the church, but there's been some things that people have interpreted from the church that I think are just absolutely ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? So, but back then, I put both middle fingers up to the Catholic Church, right? But as I've gotten older, I'm that wasn't the Catholic Church. That was poor interpretation.
Right. And it's kind of
from a couple people.
Yeah. It's kind of Jesus is fully God, fully man. The church is his body in the world, right? So it's human and divine. It's the human side that always louses things up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, when people tell me like, well, what about the problems with the church? What are we gonna do about the problems in the church? I'm like, aren't you in the church? Yeah. It's like, let's work with the man or woman in the mirror. Like oftentimes we can't solve those big problems, but I can wake up in the mirror, look at the man in the mirror and say, okay, Lord, help me work on him today.
Here, any church you're a
Yeah.
part of, whether it's non-denominational, it's all got shit to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's face it,
Right.
all of it. And at the end of the day, you said it, it's ran by humans. I mean, the Pope is a human. You are a human. Father Rogers, human. I mean, he's going to say things that are going to make someone mad. He's going to make decisions that are going to make someone mad. It just is what it is. If you're going to leave every church because you get upset, I mean, you're going to bounce from church to
Right.
church to church your entire life. You'll never have a home.
Mm-hmm.
You just won't. It just is what it is.
Right.
Agree.
Agree.
But I'm really I'm impressed with the story. I'm impressed with how, what's the word I'm looking for? Resilient. God, you've shown a lot of resilience. I mean, to be able to go through what you went through, and here, a lot of the wounds are self-inflicted. A lot of mine are self-inflicted. Some of them aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make it hurt any less, though.
No. I mean, at the end of the day, here, how many times were you in with an inmate on death row that made a decision under the influence of alcohol and or drugs, and now is going to pay for it with his life or her life?
Yeah. Yeah, the statistics, whenever I speak on it, the statistics are older. They're from like 2021 now. But if you look at like murders, homicides, domestic violence, like so many of the big name crimes, like I think the current stat in 2021 was like 75% of those type of like big crimes are completely involved with alcohol, drug, substance abuse culture. Like that's why I tell people like these two worlds interrelate. Well, I met very few men or women behind bars who did whatever they did completely separate from that culture.
Right.
Whether they were under the influence or trying to get under the influence or a drug deal went bad or they were, whatever. Like I try to tell people like if we can help men and women have a spiritual experience and not fall into the grips of substance abuse addiction, man, that would do so well in terms of combating some of these other issues.
Yeah. The catch-22, the hard part about it is for me, like the devil shows himself to you and then that just solidifies your faith, which is why, you have most people whose faith is super, super strong have went through some serious crap, right? Or put themselves through some serious crap, right? Because you've had some late night conversations with the devil. And then, by default, God reveals himself to you,
Right.
Much stronger than someone who didn't put themselves through that type of story.
Well, yeah, and it just shows like, God won't waste anything, right? Like if you go through that, and oftentimes, like I always tell people now, like I don't even know who I would be as a man or as a priest if I didn't have these things happen in my life.
Oh,
Like I would have no clue.
I wouldn't be near as good a husband.
Right.
I wouldn't be near as good a father. I just, had I not went through what I went through for 10 years,
Right.
I mean, I don't know that I would ever be satisfied with one woman had I not done what I done,
Right. And it doesn't mean those things were like good. It just means
it's not.
It just means by the power of God,
He brought good
he
from
can
bad.
bring good from it. Yeah.
He brought good from bad. That's what he does.
Right.
Graves to gardens.
Amen.
And I don't regret any of it.
Right.
Weirdly.
Well, it's kind of like one of the promises. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. When I first heard that, that I will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I'm like, that can't be true. Like, I want to shut the door on this as quick as possible. And it's taken years. Like you were asking, like, let's say after November 12th of 2016, where I thought, oh, I've been gifted with at least knowledge of some of these things and to give to others. Well, I wasn't out there just sharing my story and saying this is a gift until much later, right? And so it's even opportunities like this where all of a sudden it's moments like this where that promise reveals itself as true, where I don't regret it because God's redeemed it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not shutting the door on it either.
Right. And so for the longest time, because once Gianna was born, it was like a light went off, where I was like, okay, I don't want this anymore, because with Ross, Joseph, and Nina, they were over their dad's part-time.
Mm-hmm.
So when they were over their dad's and and how do I want to say this? Because I don't want to, if I were to have to look at Ross, Joseph, and Nina under the influence of a hangover or the self-loathing of using,
Right.
okay, I wasn't able to do that. I would have never been able to do that, right? But when they were gone and they weren't in front of me and they didn't have to see me, because you know how it is, you don't want anyone seeing you either.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I was still able to live that lifestyle with Ross, Joseph, and Nina because they were only with me part-time. But once Gianna was there and she was with me all the time, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I didn't want to. And I didn't want to. So it took that drive away from me. It took that drive to go out and drink, and it took that drive to go out and do drugs. It just completely took it away. And that I credit, I don't want to say, I think God gave that to me to get me to stop.
Yeah.
I think everybody has an instrument to stop them in their tracks and say, "Hey, think." And I think God uses different things. For you was Gianna. For me, it was jail. That the and kind of getting that wake up call for that short period of time that I had to do. But I think everybody has that moment where God's going to be like, "Okay, I'm stopping you from yourself."
Yeah.
Right. Well, because here Michelle was 8 months pregnant with Gianna and kicked me out of the house.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until I seen her, that I was like, okay, no way, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this anymore. But when you only have them part time, it's like gives you that opportunity, and that's all you need.
Right.
Is that little?
Well, I mean, just like he was saying when he was in seminary, he would drink at night. You find the opportunity if you still have the craving, until you have that wake up.
Well, and it's kind of like, to use a more humorous version of this, is like as a priest, like let's say I'm on the sidelines at something, or I'm in the grocery store, and there's someone, they say a bunch of bad words. Oh, sorry, Father. Well, why? You're not going to offend me. Why do you say sorry, Father? Well, what it is like when the priest is there, people think, oh,
you got to stand on ceremony.
Oh yeah, and then some people think, oh, that reminds me that God's here. Crap, right? And what I'm getting at is like, so for you, God gave you a sign of his affection through Gianna of saying like, I'm with you.
Right.
Right. Or like for me, it was just like when I realized I had now something greater to live for, to be sober for, than the reason I wanted to continue to go back into the drinking and the shame.
Right.
And so it's this beautiful moment where there has to come that moment where the good, the beautiful thing, whether it's the family, the faith, whatever it is, outweighs that lingering desire for what happens, right? And
well, and like you said, with the whole concept of you're not going to be ashamed and you're not going to shut the door on the past. I had a real battle with whether or not I wanted to share my story with Ross, Joseph, and Nina. I had a real big, internal fight as to whether or not, and I chose to do it, once they were in high school and once I knew they were going to be faced with that stuff.
Yeah.
I said, I got to tell them how this is going to play out. I had to let them know, hey, not only is this going to happen, but it's going to come from someone that you trust. And it's going to come from someone that you're comfy and cozy around. It's not going to come from someone who's sketch. The devil's not going to play the game that way. It's going to, it's not going to come from, that dude that just looks like he's had the shit beat out of him and he's, a bum on the street. It's going to come from someone who you think, oh yeah, I trust this person. That's who,
Right.
And then I shared my story and how, and went down my path and where it came from and how it started. And, I did end up sharing it with them, and Michelle kind of was like, God, Frank, I don't know that you should have done that. And I'm like, they didn't come with manuals. Unfortunately, they didn't come with instruction manuals. I don't know if it was the right decision or not, but I will do the same thing with the 3 little ones. I will have that conversation with them. They'll know everything. I'll tell them all of it. They're not, Ross, Joseph, and Nina were in high school when I had the conversation.
Right. Well, it's finding the right way, the right mode, and the right
timing's everything.
Timing,
I mean, one thing that I learned through kind of, their treatment was your addiction is going to lead you to one of 3 spots: jail, institution, or death.
Yep.
And that's always resonated with me. It's like, if I continue to act this way, this is the ultimate end. I mean, it's going to end one of 3 ways. And that really resonated with me. It's like, I think when you share that, I think it's always good to let people know, like, there's no modification once you've come to this point of where you're going to end up. If you continue to, and once you've defined the problem and you've realized that your life has come, powerless over alcohol and drugs, and your life is becoming unmanageable, you're going one of 3 places if you continue to act the way you act. And I think that was like when I share my story with people who are struggling, I'd let them know, hey, you got 3 options and none of them are good. So you kind of figure out which direction you want to go, because there is a 4th option, but you can't continue to behave the same way and get the 4th option.
Well, and that's where it's like, there's that old adage, you never go out and hit a higher bottom.
Right.
Like you go back out and you're like, oh, I'm going to get it. I'm going to finally do it this time. Like there's been people I've sponsored that kind of keep, trying to get out there and do it again. And finally I told someone, I said, you know what? He said, well, it's only a suggestion. All the things you're sharing are called suggestions. I'm like, that's right. And I was like, they are suggestions. Your alternative, but I will walk over your body to find someone that wants this. Like, it's that tough love. Like, I'm giving you that. I'll always have my hand out ready to help somebody, because there was always someone there to help me.
Right.
But if they don't want it, that's the hard part.
That is the hard part.
Where it's like, hey, I would suggest you do this, this, this. And a lot of it's just true blue recovery type stuff. It's like, no, I'm going to try a different way. And we always know. We try to find an easier, softer path. But the result was nil till we let go absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe I'm too much of like a fundamentalist on that stuff, but that's because that's what saved my life.
Here, I remember calling centers for a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, because he was like, look, I am not going to do this cold turkey. There's no way. It was heroin.
Yeah.
And he said, there's no way I can do this cold turkey. And when I called those centers, they said, I'm not talking to you. If he can't call himself, I'm not talking to you. And he's not ready if he can't call on his own.
Right.
And I was like, man, that's cold. You're going to leave. I'm telling you that where this guy's at, they didn't care. They wanted to hear from him.
Yeah.
They wanted to hear from him. And if he couldn't call, he wasn't ready, and they didn't have time for it. They had other people that they needed to tend to. And I get it now.
Mm-hmm.
I get it now. It's really a tough love scenario.
I think that's and maybe I'm wrong about this, but will you talk to somebody who you're sponsoring if they're loaded, or will you say, "Call me back later," or like if they're drunk are you going to still have that conversation with them, or are you going to be like, "No, we need to speak when you sober up. Go get some." I mean,
Yeah, so luckily that hasn't happened very often, but there was an instance where there's this one guy that I would visit when I would sponsor him. We'd have a cigar in the afternoon, and I'd always just chat with him. And I could tell as soon as I walked into his house, he was drunk.
Yeah.
And he had the shakes. He was slurring his words. And so I kind of humored him for a while. Hey, how you doing, John Doe? And once I could ascertain that, yeah, he's using, well, first I just wanted to finish the smoke, so I stayed there long enough to finish the smoke.
right.
But finally I kind of looked at him. I was like, well, I can tell you're still using, and he couldn't because he's not in his right mind.
Right.
Right. And it's like let's say he's 50. When I'm talking to him in the act of drinking, he's 10.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know? And so it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And that's where I'll have that. It's like, well, thank you for the smoke. And when, I'm going to have your wife call me as soon as you
sober up.
And then I call immediately after because the gift of desperation. So for me, anytime, so there have been moments where I've called guys I sponsor who are, when I can realize, nope, you're right now currently using, I kind of find a way to land the plane. It's like, no, I just don't do it.
Call me before you use.
Well, that's what I try to get him to. It's like, this, don't call me in the midst of it.
Right.
Like I have I love you, but I'm not going to be codependent. I'm not going to enable you. And there is a savior. It's not me.
Right.
I will sponsor you. I will not save you.
Yeah.
I'm not washing my hands of you, but right now you're not going to hear what I've got to say.
And that shocks me that people do that. Cause for me personally, I was so incredibly embarrassed when I used. Like I got to the point where when I used, I didn't want to be around anyone.
Right.
No one. And for initially it was very social. I wanted to be around people. And then when I used, I didn't want to be around no one. I wanted to be in my room by myself. I would even find myself, because I lived with one of my closest friends, hiding from him in the house. Like, I don't want him to know that I'm doing this right now. And when you're in that situation, then man, this is wrong. This is bad.
Yeah.
But then simultaneously, when it was time to quit, I just quit. Yeah. Zero withdrawals. None of that. I don't know. Maybe God just took care of me. Right. That's possible.
Well, I also think that you were probably using something that didn't, and it was spaced out far enough to where you weren't physically addicted, but it still captured your mental side of things. But physically, when I stopped using, I'd immediately feel worse and worse and worse, not only mentally, but physically.
Yeah. And see, when I stopped using, I immediately started feeling better.
Right.
Where we always say it's like that spirit, mind, and body, right? Yeah. And it starts in the mind first. I obsess over not, and that's where I realized I had a problem, because it wasn't people like for the alcoholic, right? What distinguishes an alcoholic from a non-alcoholic isn't the fact that we're idiots and assholes when we drink. That happens to all of them. It's I'm that way when I'm not drinking. And my everything about my life was saying I would plan social events around, do they serve alcohol at that restaurant? If a friend said, hey, we're going to go get supper, I would say, where? And then if they said, we're going to this restaurant and they didn't serve booze, I say, I can't go. Why? Because if I'm going to sit down with you, I'm going to have a drink.
Right.
And all of a sudden I planned everything around it. I would have it in my, like I said, in seminary, I would have it in my truck, and I would have it in I used to have cowboy boots, and I would find ways to have a little tiny little flask and have it slid in there and think, okay, how can I time up my day to where I can somehow get this out of my boot and sneak it in, Yeah. And what I'm getting at is I would plan everything around that.
Yeah.
Right? Well, non-alcoholic problem drinkers, they don't think about that.
Right.
They just say, okay, I had too many on a Friday night, I feel bad. No. And the fact is, like you're saying, like I have friends that were heavy drinkers. I had friends that when I first got sober, they were scandalized.
Well, and I honestly, like me, I can 100% go out and have 2 drinks, 3 drinks. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll go out and get drunk as shit. Mm-hmm. And I may not drink again for 6 months.
Right.
I may not drink again for 6 months. So I've never had that issue where I couldn't have. I could go out and have a drink, get tired, go home, go to bed. No big deal for me.
Right.
You know, I never had the issue with alcohol.
And I know that this differs depending on the alcoholic, but I have a lot of parishioners that would, like, if I come over to their house for supper or something, they'll say like, oh, like, because and I've realized, they said, do you have any dietary restrictions? Where I need to start saying is, yes, I'm allergic to alcohol. I break out in handcuffs. Because I'm learning as a new baby priest is if I say, oh, no, I have no dietary restrictions. What do most people do when you show up to
They're
their
going to
house?
offer you some drink.
They open it, and I try to just graciously say, oh, no, I don't drink.
And they're going to offer you the good
The
stuff.
good stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and I just have to always say, oh, no, sorry. But then what it does is it gives a baby version of our conversation today. Because it's like, oh, do you want wine or liquor? Well, no, you have club soda. Which, if you have someone drink club soda frequently, they're probably an alcoholic.
Yeah. Because nobody enjoys club soda.
Like I have learned to love club soda. That's a strange thing, right? And so what happens is parishioners like, oh, okay, well, why? And then I open up about it, right? It's a beautiful opportunity. Plus, it gets them a little uncomfortable because most people have a very like, wait, you're a priest and this happened, you know? But what I tell people, and some guys that I work with would maybe take a stronger stance than I do, is like, for example, if you all were drinking right now, it wouldn't bother me a bit, right? Alcohol was my lover. Alcohol was my girlfriend. And I abused that relationship. It wasn't good for me. We had some good times, but I had to dump her, right?
Right.
If other people are able to drink around me, to me, it's just like, well, I'm glad you still can enjoy it. Or if I go into a bar now, it's like you look at the wall, it's like a bunch of old girlfriends. You wave and say, hi, ladies, right? Like, that's me. And so I'm able to still be around it. And by the grace of God, I'm not like tempted. Like they're not jumping
Your
off.
palms start sweating.
They're not jumping off the shelf.
But
there are many who that is true for. And so I never say, like, don't put yourself into a near occasion of sin, as we say. Like, I'm not going to say, like, oh, yeah, like you're sober. Just go out there and, you know, go to Gomer's and try to get everything off the shelf. Like, be smart.
Right.
But for me, it doesn't bother me anymore.
But for 7 years, you know, since the time you've been sober, you've worked up coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms against probably going.
Correct.
You wouldn't tell the person who just stopped drinking, you could probably go to that party. You
Correct.
know?
And I tell people, you got, like they always say, change playground, playmates, all that shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like I have guys that are like they're fresh.
Yeah.
You know, and so I usually just like, hey, you're going to call me every day. Or sometimes I'd say, oh, depending on the person, you're going to do this, or at least suggest it. Right.
Right.
And I'll never say like, oh yeah, if someone invites you over and they have alcohol, just, you got it. You have, 12 hours under your belt. No, you might be like, oh, sorry, I can't go.
Right.
Right. Because I'm not there. You don't have to try to like show your mettle that early,
Yeah.
and so trying to do that.
You'll know when you're
You'll
strong
know.
enough.
And that's
You'll
what I
know
tell
when you're
people.
strong.
I tell people, I didn't get sober 7 years at a time.
Yeah, right.
Right. I got sober one moment at a time,
Yeah.
which piled on to one day at a time,
Yeah.
which piled on to another one day at a time. And that's how I kind of try to treat people as a priest, like no one's, irredeemable. So if someone's stuck in some sin that they think I've never been able to shake this and I'm never going to shake, it's like, oh no, like you don't have to conquer this sin the rest of your life. Right. Because if someone said, oh, you can never use the rest of your life, like, okay, then I'm going to, but I tell people like, you don't have to quit that sin tomorrow. Just don't do it today.
Yeah.
Or don't do it right now. Or the fact you're talking to me right now, you haven't committed that sin. So praise God, right? Like finding those recovery principles that I apply as a priest all the time.
Small wins.
Yeah, the little wins.
Small wins.
And that there is with a winner's mindset. And I've actually learned this, like spending time with the high school and the coaches. I pay a lot of attention to good coaches. Because what am I? I'm a spiritual coach.
Yeah.
And so like when you mentioned like sometimes in the locker room, like I'm not just I'm trying to learn a lot about football too, right? But I'm also saying like, how do these men?
You mean you didn't do that at Carrollton?
No,
Or-
here, yeah. But I try to tell us like, I'm also observing like, how do you build a winning program as a parish?
Yeah.
How do you coach people in their faith? Like try to translate some of this, right? And it's that idea of like what I've learned from the coaches at times is like, you don't win or lose, you win or learn.
Yeah.
Right. A winner's mindset is failure is a temporary moment. It's not an identity.
Well, and at the end of the day, like me personally, I don't want to play teams that I'm always going to beat.
Mm-hmm.
Like a true champion, I think, is seeking a loss in a weird way.
Growth.
Yeah,
Seeking
I mean,
growth.
you're seeking that guy that's going to be playing chess while you're playing checkers, right? He outsmarted you. He outcoached you. You know, I mean, you don't want to get out prepared ever.
Right.
You know, you,
Right.
you don't want to get outworked ever. But you want to go against those guys that are better than you.
Right.
You know, I mean, you just do. So that's you know, a true champion doesn't want to sit there and only play the guys that he can beat. That's boring.
Right. And so that's why I try to bring that mindset into like the faith. Like, hey, you know, some days you either win in the game of faith, which means you're in right relationship with God, your prayer life's good, you're trying to be the right man, right father, right, you know, whatever your state in life is, right? And if sometimes these sins and these disordered attachments and all that stuff gets in, well, you didn't lose, you're learning.
Yeah.
You know, and okay, they got your number that day. Wake up in the morning and you're going to learn how to beat that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we could easily talk 2 more hours, but
Right.
but what I want, I'd like to, and this is kind of putting you on the spot. What would be the one, like the single declarative sentence that you would say you've learned from the last 7 years?
I would say for me,
What would you tell someone
I would
right now who's listening to this, silently suffering from some form of addiction?
right. I would tell the new person that you are always more beloved and better than the worst thing you've ever done.
Yeah.
You are always more beloved and better than the worst thing you've ever done. And that lie of not being worthy of love is indeed a lie.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
That's
Good stuff.
That's good stuff. Yeah. I mean, like the most important thing I think that I learned in my, which would help me, is you're not what you did.
Yeah.
You know, like the distinguishing factor between guilt and shame.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where the messenger and the message are so different. Where guilt, you know, because people are like, oh, I left the Catholic Church. It made me feel too guilty. Well, if you go to church and it don't make you feel guilty, you're probably going
Right.
to
Like,
the wrong
like
church.
guilt is, you know, I did something wrong. Shame is I'm inherently wrong.
Right.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like, no, you're inherently like worth fighting for, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree.
Awesome. Good stuff. Thank you so much. I was so excited for this. I think it's a great story, and I hope that, because so like this one, we're gonna do the first one on the 15th, which would be Dane, and then Carlos will come out on the 22nd.
This is of January?
No, December.
Oh, December.
So then
Yeah.
Carlos will come out on the 22nd, and then Kurt would be the 29th, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he would be the first Friday in.
We have Ashton.
Ashton would be the first Friday in January. You'll come out on the second Friday in January.
Yeah.
So hopefully by then, you know, we've captured enough attention and
Good. Well, like I said, I'm really grateful y'all are having me on. I hope.
I think I knew when you said you didn't know if you were podcast worthy, I'm like, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
You are definitely worthy of it. And honestly, what we may end up doing, which good Lord willing, we capture, you know, an audience and start getting a bunch of people listening. I may have you come on again, you know, because I want to get the story out to as many people as we can, because I think it's a fantastic story.
Well, and for me, it's recovery. It's also like the faith for me. Like, and I think sometimes it's a good witness too for, you know, to when people see a guy in a collar, you know, whether it's communicating this type of story, sharing life with you all, it's like it breaks down barriers too.
Sure.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
You know,
For your parishioners. You want
absolutely.
100%.
You're relatable. You know, I think when you speak to your flaws and that you know that you are man, you are just a human. You're flawed. It makes you relatable,
Yeah.
which drops that barrier. It lets people listen to you and hear what you got to say.
Yeah. I think it's awesome.
Huge.
And I also, like I said at the very beginning, I'll say it again. Anytime I get an opportunity to have this type of story come on and like that where people have this but God moment. Like, I was an alcoholic. I was this. I was that. I was a drug addict. I was, a liar, but God.
Yeah.
This but God moment that completely and totally changes everything. I'm always gonna have that story
Absolutely.
on here to selfishly listen. Even
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
selfishly listen. So thank you. I appreciate it. Let's eat.